know they worked hard to make that happen. So glad to.
Yeah. Wow, thank you. Thank you. Oh, here's a little something here. Hi. You guys are so great. Look how you came out. Wonderful. So happy.
All right.
You're going to go first.
Yeah, we'll go first. So, hey, everybody. It's really great to see all of you out here. Thanks for coming out to this meeting. Really appreciate it. And I had a chance before we started to go out and talk to some folks, and I see so many of you that I've seen on the picket lines and helping make this entire negotiation and strike process happen. So I just want to acknowledge that and say how great it is to get a chance to talk to you in person here. Although I must admit I didn't recognize everybody because without you having your picket sign and your shirt on, and I didn't have my hat. So anyway, I'm Duncan Crabtree-Ireland, National Executive Director, Chief Negotiator of SAG-AFTRA, and just thank you. And I just, all of the work that everyone here did over this summer, standing in unity, getting out there on the picket lines, doing what was necessary, helped our negotiating committee create the kind of leverage that allowed us to continue these negotiations and ultimately make a deal with the AMPTP. And that unity, that solidarity, I think just means everything. And I have seen a bunch, yes, thank you. That's great. Yes, let's applaud that. Because that is what it's all about. We're all in this together, and that's why we're here now. And I especially want to note that I saw a bunch of strike captains. Strike captains from here. That's right. And I wonder if y'all could all stand up. Thank you. So our strike captains. I think everybody knows this, but we could not have done this without our strike captains. Every single picket line here in Los Angeles, every single day. And you guys brought it, and you brought it with not only a sense of steely determination, but with a sense of compassion for your fellow strikers, with a sense of helping take care of everyone. And it made it possible for us to do that for 118 days. So thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. And of course, I want to make sure we acknowledge all of our members who participated in the wages and working conditions process, the W&W process that started end of last year and starting in December and worked its way up to our entire, that's where our proposal package came from in the first place. And I hope that all of you who've gotten engaged in this cycle will remember that and be fully engaged in our next cycle of wages and working conditions process as well, because that's how we figure out what needs to go across the table. That's how we determine how our proposal package should look. So our agenda today is going to include a presentation of the new contract specifics. We're going to address in advance some answers to frequently asked questions, and then we're going to open the floor to questions, as you can see by the mics that are out there. But first, I want to just make sure we introduce everyone who is joining us up here on the dais today and who are going to help answer questions and add some nuance to the conversation. Of course, she really needs no introduction, as proved by your response to her before, but to my immediate right, SAG-AFTRA President Fran Drescher.
Thank you.
To her right, President of the Los Angeles Local and Negotiating Committee Vice Chair Jody Long. To her right, Los Angeles Second Vice President and Negotiating Committee member David Jolliffe. To my left, Chief Contracts Officer and co-lead negotiator Ray Rodriguez. And to Ray's left, Chief Communications and Marketing Officer and Strike Manager Pamela Greenwald. I also want to introduce the members of our negotiating committee who are seated up here on the dais as well. And so just want you to know who they are. Starting out with the members of the committee, Secretary Treasurer Jolie Fisher. She was here. Maybe she stepped out. I think she might have stepped out
She
into
had to
there.
go to a, yeah.
Oh, is she coming back? Okay,
She'll
great.
be back.
Frances Fisher. Michelle Hurd. Ron Ostro. Charlie Bowden. Natalia Castellanos. Jason George. Sarah Ramos. Not here yet? Okay. All right. Sean Sharma. Kevin E. West. Ben Whitehair. Okay. Dan Navarro. There's Dan. Danielle Town. Nicole Cyril. Samantha Hartson. And last but not least, Woody Schultz. And since I can't actually see them because I'm looking this direction, right behind us are some of our staff subject matter experts. So can you all just stand up so the members can see you, if you can. These are our staff who helped us with negotiations. They're just a handful of the dozens and dozens of staff who are part of these negotiations and are here to help us answer questions tonight. So thank you. Woo! Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. I could see you. I knew who it was. Me too. So next, just real quick on the agenda and sort of ground rules for tonight. We have a detailed presentation that we're going to make. It's going to be followed by Q&A, as I had mentioned before. For the Q&A, we're going to rotate through the mics that are on the floor in the aisles. The presentation is going to take about 45 minutes, so please wait until we're done with the presentation before you start lining up for questions, or you're going to be standing for quite a while, and we don't want that. There will be sergeant-at-arms at each of the mics to facilitate the Q&A process. And these are LA strike captains, so please be nice to them. They have given and continue to give a lot to this union. We have about an hour and a half, maybe a bit more for questions, but we'll go long a little bit if we need to. And obviously, we're here to hear what you have to say and to answer your questions. But if you can, try to keep your questions focused and to the point so that there's enough time for everybody to give their remarks or ask their questions. So, Fran, I think at this point we're going to pause for a moment and see if you have some welcoming remarks that you'd like to say to the group before we go on.
Buddhist wisdom.
Me? Oh.
Yeah.
You know, I was here just last night at a Her concert.
Woo!
And it was a totally different vibe, I must say. But it's so good to be here, and it's so good that so many of you came out tonight because you're doing your due diligence. This is a really, big deal, and it's I think a real kind of turning point for our union, something that really hasn't happened, such a milestone since the last 1960 contract. So it's a big deal, and one that we expect will be built upon for decades, probably through the rest of this century. So, it's good that when coming here, and then also we're live streaming, I don't know if you know that, but for everybody around the world that is tuning in, welcome. This is education, knowledge is power, and I applaud you all for wanting to make an informed decision. So bravo to you, and I'm sure that you're very eager to get on with the show. So thank you so much. Thank you for everything. Your member participation is the heart and soul of this union. So thank you for being here, and let's proceed.
Awesome. So thank you for that. Thank you for that, Fran. And so what we'll do is go ahead and put the slide deck up on the screen so everyone can see it, and we'll get started with the presentation. So Ray and I will be sort of tag teaming on this. I get to start it off. And so, okay, yeah. It is the 2023 TV Theatrical Tentative Agreement, as you can see. So let's just go ahead and get started. We want to start out by talking about the valuation of this contract, just to give you a context of what it represents. So the value of this contract is a little bit more than $1 billion over the 31.5-month term. And that includes both new compensation and also includes benefit plan funding increases. And specifically, that's $697.6 million in additional wages and residuals, and $317.2 million in the form of additional contributions into the SAG-AFTRA health plan, the SAG producers pension plan, and the after retirement fund. So really want to just acknowledge this as a milestone, because there has never been a contract in this industry before that has exceeded this milestone. And while really it's important to look at what that means in detail, which we'll do, in the aggregate, it's an extraordinary number, and one that really reflects the hard-fought strike that we carried out over the last 4 months, and the negotiations that this committee sitting behind me did over the preceding 35 days before that. So continuing on, let's talk about minimums. So I think our committee is justifiably proud that we have broken this so-called industry pattern. And what that means is it has always been the case, at least in the last few decades in this industry, that whatever the first union was that went, they established a pattern of minimum increases, and everybody else had to just accept those increases. We started out this negotiation saying we were not going to do that. We rejected the idea that the pattern controlled us, and we were going to negotiate for what we felt our members needed. And so here's what the result of that is an unprecedented wage pattern, which includes 2 wage increases in the first year of the contract. First, a 7% general wage increase that took effect on November 9th. And then in addition to that, next July 1st, a 4% additional wage increase, which means when you compound those 2 numbers together, it's an effective 11.28% wage increase during the first year of this contract. Then during the following year, starting on July 1st of 2025, there'll be an additional 3.5% wage increase. So those are the minimums, and I should just note there's a different pattern for background actors, which we'll talk about shortly. Next, we want to turn to the topic of artificial intelligence, and it's definitely clear to me that this is of great interest to our members. Anyone who's been on social media over the last few days or just paying attention knows that this has been a really hot topic of conversation, and I'm looking forward to us having a dialogue about this tonight. But in this contract, we have provided for the first time comprehensive rules regarding informed consent and fair compensation for the use of artificial intelligence in the form of digital replicas or in the form of synthetic performers, or synthetic fakes, as we like to call them. And I do want to just note that this comes from a place of a blank page. There was nothing about this in this contract prior to these negotiations, for reasons that I'm sure are apparent. And so this is something where we have created these regulations, these limitations and restrictions from whole cloth. So let's first of all talk about employment-based digital replicas. This is the scenario where the producer hires you and you're going to go work on a project, and as part of working on the project, they want to scan you and create a digital replica of you. So if the employer is going to do that, they have to give you 48 hours notice in advance of their intent to do that. And they have to ask for your informed consent. And that means that consent has to be clear and conspicuous. It can't be buried or hidden in your start paperwork or your contract or a deal memo or a voucher. In addition, that consent has to be reasonably specific. It has to give reasonably specific details about the intended use of that replica. And any time that you spend creating that replica is paid for work time. In terms of compensation, you get paid for that, not only for the creation of the digital replica, but for any use of that digital replica based on the amount of time that it would have taken you as a human performer to do that work. And you get that compensation plus pension and health contributions and residuals for that as well. And to be very clear, because I know this has been a question I've gotten frequently about this, if the producer wants to then use that digital replica in any other way, in any other project, in any future project, for any other purpose aside from that picture that you were engaged for or that episode that you were engaged for, they have to secure your informed consent to that. And with one specific exception, they have to do that at the time of its subsequent use. They can't do it when you're initially hired for this project. And why is that important? That's important because it gives you the leverage, if it is ever going to be subsequently used, to negotiate for that when this job is not part of that conversation. You already done this job, and then after that, that's when they can ask you for that consent. The only exception to that is when there's a multi-picture deal, and if there's a multi-picture deal, they can seek your consent for each part of that multi-picture deal, but they have to have that informed, specific, detailed, informed consent at the time, or otherwise they're going to have to secure that consent later when you have more leverage. There's another kind of digital replica that we also have gotten regulations for. It's called an independently created digital replica. And I want to just note, this is particularly groundbreaking because one of the things that the companies could have done is refuse to negotiate with us over independently created digital replicas because the work done to create them isn't work that's being done under our contracts. This is, for example, if you decide to go create your own digital replica and license it to producers to use, or if you partner with a third-party company that creates digital replicas of performers and then you are making a deal with a producer to use that digital replica. In those scenarios, there's not sort of a traditional start to that employment relationship with studios, but nonetheless, we were able to secure provisions protecting your right to informed consent over the use of those replicas. So even though they had to negotiate a deal either with you or with a third-party company that you're in business with for purposes of creating a digital replica, you have an independent right of informed consent to know with specific details the intended use of that digital replica in that project. And you have a right to negotiate compensation for that as well. And any compensation that you do negotiate for that use will have pension and health contributions paid on top of it, so you will continue to gain eligibility for your benefits from that use. Okay, next slide. Oops, no, that's not right. There we go. Next, let's talk about digital alteration. So digital alteration is a concept that the companies actually raised as part of the back and forth that we had over getting regulations on AI to begin with. And the concept behind digital alteration was that they wanted to make sure that they could do things that they can currently do using editing, CGI, VFX, et cetera, that these new regulations on AI wouldn't stop them from continuing to be able to do those same kinds of things that they've traditionally done, but with the use of AI technology instead of necessarily relying on traditional editing, VFX, or CGI. And so what that does is that is limited to certain types of changes, and you can see a list in our summary of the contract. By the way, I guess I should mention, the summary of the contract, which is about 18 pages long, is found on our website. And I will also make an aside to mention, I know a lot of people have asked me, can we see the full contract language? We want to see the full drafted out memorandum of agreement. And so I just want to let you know that we are working very hard to get that done and out to you. It has never been done before in any prior negotiation where we have been able to get the MOA completed during the ratification process, but we know how important it is for members who want to see that. So we're working really hard to do that, and I do expect to be able to release the full drafted MOA within the coming few days or by next week at some point. So just know it's coming. It's really, really long, So please understand that's why we've gained a lot in this contract, but no one's trying to, no one's trying to hide the ball or anything like that. We'll get it out to you as soon as we possibly can. And in the meanwhile, you have the 18-page summary for late bedtime reading. Anyway, any kind of digital alteration that is made has to remain as scripted or as recorded or performed. So they cannot use the digital alterations section to try and add scenes into a project, to try and have your digital replica do things that they didn't get proper consent for. It's a very limited and constrained use. It's meant for post-production alterations and things like that. Another example is it could occur when the use of a double would be permitted to do the same thing. And there is a provision that allows for lip, face, or body movement or voice alterations for translation to foreign languages or changes necessary for marketing in a specific market. And I do want to just note, and a great example of what that means is there's a company that actually has been consulting with SAG-AFTRA for several years called Flawless that that uses actual voice actors to do the foreign language dubbing, but uses AI technology to adjust lip and facial movements so that the dubbing can be done with an exact translation of the original script instead of adjusting the script to match the mouth movements. That's done, their marketing for that, their effort to push that is about creating a higher quality result, not about getting rid of actors' jobs or using voice synthesis or anything like that. That's the kind of thing we want to encourage because it does help protect actors' job opportunities, and that's something that, for example, would be encouraged or allowed by this provision. Next, we want to talk about generative AI, and this is something that I know a lot of people are very, very concerned about, scared about, and understandably so, The scenario that was the subject of our negotiations in generative AI was the scenario where a company decides not to create a digital replica of a particular actor, because that's all covered by our digital replica provisions. It's where a company wants to use generative AI to create an actor that doesn't really exist at all in the real world. But that's not really created from nothing. That's created from a trained AI data set that might include who knows how many people. And that's how that AI learns to actually create the output that it's going to generate. So obviously we're very concerned about this, I think in the long term, in terms of its implications for the business and for careers of our members. In the short term, what we're really concerned about is making sure that there is not an economic incentive for these companies to use synthetic fakes instead of real actors. And so what we did achieve in this contract is we achieved, number one, a notice requirement. So if these companies do generate any synthetic fake performers, they have to notify the union that they're doing it, and we have a right to negotiate over consideration or compensation for that. And the reason for that right is not so much to compensate the people who might have trained that data set, but to help make sure that it's not economically advantageous to the companies to create synthetic fakes to use instead of real actors. So that is what we will use that negotiation right to do, to make sure it's just as expensive, if not more, to use a synthetic fake actor instead of using either a human actor or a specific human actor's paid for digital replica. So that's what those provisions are intended for. We did try to get a union consent provision. We fought for it the entire 118 days of the strike. We were not able to get it, despite the massive leverage you all created for us by being out on those picket lines every day. The leverage was not enough to get the companies to agree to a union consent provision, but we were able, on the very last day of negotiations, to get an individual consent provision where if a recognizable facial feature of one of our members is used as part of the creation of a synthetic fake performer, and that generative AI system is prompted for that by the use of their name, then in that scenario, the company must go and get the individual consent of that person before they can create that synthetic using their recognizable features. So those are the accomplishments in generative AI. Is it everything that we would like it to be? No. We do expect to continue negotiating for additional gains in the generative AI area in the future. But to be perfectly honest, this is the greatest restriction that we could achieve with the leverage that we have. And we do believe that this, especially the notice and compensation negotiation requirement, will protect our members from any kind of developments in the use of synthetic fakes over the term of this contract before we are back in negotiations again in 2.5 years. So that's where we are on generative AI. And the last little bullet here is about semi-annual meetings, and that may not seem like something that sounds so great. I mean, who wants to go to a semi-annual meeting? But in fact, the companies have committed to meet with us twice a year, every year during the term of this contract, to discuss what they're doing with AI, where it's going, and our concerns about it. And I think that'll have real value to us in two ways. Number one, it will help us prepare for the next round of bargaining, and it will also help us make sure that they understand the kind of pushback that they're going to get if the implementation of AI is going in the wrong direction. So I'll just stop for 1 second to just say, I know and I understand there's plenty of people probably in this room and certainly amongst our members who would rather that AI didn't exist or would have liked us to do something to just stop AI from happening. Yeah, that's fine. You should clap for that. I totally get that. And here's the real truth. The real truth is we can't stop AI from happening. Okay, I know people don't want to hear that, but it's true. We cannot stop it. We do not have enough power. The entire AFL-CIO together doesn't have enough power to stop AI from happening any more than anyone could have stopped the invention of the printing press, the Industrial Revolution, the invention of the assembly line, the invention of television. You know, there were people who didn't want television to occur, right, because it changed things. The invention of the internet, none of those things could we have stopped no matter how much leverage and time and strike time, and et cetera, we put in. And that's the truth about AI as well. And that's why our strategy has been, we use our maximum leverage to put guardrails around it and to channel the way that AI is implemented into things that are helpful, hopefully, or at least less damaging to our performers and to the creative part of the industry. And I think if you read I think it's about 5 pages of that summary that are devoted to AI, or I think when the MOA is done, it's going to be 15 or 16 pages of contract language that are specific to AI, something like that. I think you'll see that there is a tremendous advance in limiting how AI can disrupt your careers, and it may not be perfect, but it is, honestly, it's a hell of a lot better than a blank page or not having those protections in place. So I'll just leave it at that, while I acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do to advance those AI provisions in the future. Talk about background actors and artificial intelligence. For everyone in this room whose background, let me just tell you, you were a very important part of our AI discussions throughout this negotiation. And I think you know that because you were a big feature of our initial press conference at the strike. I know a number of background actors have come up to me during the course of the strike and said that they really appreciated that we called out specifically what the companies were trying to do as regards to background. And let me just tell you, that provision, the one about they hire you for a day and own you for your lifetime, is gone. It is not there. They cannot do that. It is prohibited. So a few things. One thing that I think is a really important thing in background actors, for background actors in AI, is the covered background positions are protected in this contract. The companies have agreed that they must hire human actors, human background actors, for every covered position under this contract going forward. So that means you cannot be replaced by a synthetic fake or anything else. They have to hire up to the numbers. If they're using background, they have to hire them, human beings under this contract, up to the numbers. Now, they can create, with your consent, they can ask you for consent to create a digital replica. And you might say, well, if they have to hire background actors up to the numbers, why would they create a digital replica? Like, what's that for? So what that's for is if they want to then, above the numbers, use your digital replica in a future scene, if they want to extend the day, whatever. But note this, there's a specific provision that says they cannot evade engaging you by creation of a digital replica. So what that means is, if they create a digital replica of you and it's going to be used on another day above the numbers, you will be paid as though you worked that day, and you will receive your pension and health contributions as though you worked that day, even though you might be working another job that same day, by the way, and also getting paid and also getting pension and health contributions. So what they cannot do is they cannot use a digital replica, they cannot make a digital replica of you without your consent, and they cannot use that digital replica of you without your informed consent. And if they get your consent, they have to pay you as though they had hired you for that time. That is what the provisions call for. I think this is probably a good moment to talk about this issue that's come up, and I don't have a slide for it, but you'll probably all recognize it, which is this concept of something being a condition of employment, and what does that mean? And is it okay that they say that if they say to you, we want to create a digital replica of you, and if you won't agree to that, we won't hire you, because that's basically what we're talking about. So a few things to say about that. Number one, there are lots of things that are conditions of employment, and I just want you to know this is going to be a condition of employment, just like a lot of other things. Your salary is a condition of employment. Whether you're willing to relocate to another location to do a job is a condition of employment. Whether you're willing to do nudity on a project is a condition of employment. Whether you're willing to wear a certain wardrobe is a condition of employment. Whether you're willing to say certain lines is a condition of employment. And what that means is, if you're not willing to do it, then they will potentially cast somebody else, right? That's what it means. And so when you're engaged, I'm sure every single one of you has had questions asked of you. Are you willing to do this, 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 or that? Here's the details of this job. Are you willing to do it? Are you willing to work for scale? If you're not, that's fine, but maybe we won't hire you. That's how that stuff works. And so our main concern with artificial intelligence, and especially with digital replicas, is number one, ending this practice of them springing it on you at the last minute with no warning, no time to talk to a friend, an agent, a manager, a lawyer, the union. That is over, because they have to give you advance warning of the intent to ask you to create a digital replica. Number two, they have to tell you what they're going to do with that digital replica when they ask you to create it, and then if they decide to change that, they have to come back and ask you for consent later on for any kind of changes. And you can say no. And let me point out, if you're starting out on a job and they say, look, we are going to create a digital replica, they might say it for a number of reasons. They might say, I know someone on our committee, the producer said one reason they wanted to create it was for insurance reasons. Which is kind of gruesome, but what that means is if something happens to you during the project, they want to know that that project might be able to be finished. That's happened with several projects that actually have occurred in life. Or they might say, we want to be able to put you in a scene with a certain kind of computer-generated character, or whatever. They tell you these things, and you can either say yes or no. And if you say no, it may not work out for that project. That's just the reality of it. But I do want to point out, once they've engaged you, if they come back to you and they want to change what it is that your digital replica consent was for, you have the right to say yes or no to that. And if you say no, they have still engaged you. They still have to pay out your contract. They have to make a choice if they're going to use you or not, but they're going to have to pay you. Because once you're engaged and once that consent is signed, any changes are at your discretion, and you can say no. And the union will back you if you do say no. So just know that. So I assume we'll probably have more conversations about condition of employment, but that's what that's all about. So let's keep going. I know I said this was going to be a 45-minute presentation. I feel like I used up a lot of it already. Actually, now I get to turn it over to Ray, so this will probably be a lot faster.
I will try to make that a reality. Thank you. So I get to talk to you about our new high-budget SVOD streaming bonus. This is where our search for another source of revenue in the area of streaming has led us to. So for performers that are working on high-budget SVOD seasons of a series, a mini-series, or a long form that hit a defined success metric, there's going to be an additional payment due. That success metric requires that the production in question be watched by at least 20% of the domestic subscribers during the first 90 days of the exhibition. So that's what's going to trigger eligibility for the money. That money is going to be split so that 75% of it goes to, so 75% of the annual residual that you would have gotten for that show, an additional 75% is going to go to the cast of that show. So they're going to get an additional 75% of the streaming bonus for that year, or sorry, of the residual for that year, and then the other 25% of the money is going to go into a fund. That fund is going to have trustees from the union and trustees from the AMPTP. Those trustees together are going to develop a set of distribution guidelines to decide how exactly that money is going to be divided. But that money is going to be used so that the additional income that we have bargained for doesn't go only to the performers who are on those most successful shows, but the existence of this fund is going to allow us to spread that money out more widely, so that there's more people who become eligible for additional money out of this streaming bonus. And so that's how it's going to work. It's going to be based on an annual residual. 75% is going to go to the people whose show actually triggered the success metric. 25% is going to be distributed more broadly according to a set of distribution guidelines that the trustees will develop.
And we should say more broadly within folks working on those streaming platforms, just so we're clear about what more broadly means. It doesn't mean more broadly. Broadly, it means within streaming to help. I mean, the whole point of this was to help make streaming a more sustainable career for people who are working on those shows, given the shorter number of episodes, the longer hiatuses between seasons. And the goal is to help make that sustainable for everyone in that platform, not just for the folks on the most successful shows, because the truth is, streaming platforms, while they are, a lot of their success is driven by the most successful shows, they're not built only on the most successful shows. They're built on everything that's on those platforms, and the work of our members on them is really significant.
All right, I'll continue on to discuss the advance payment of residuals. This has been a problem within our membership, where people are prepaid their residuals and it looks like initial compensation money. And so somebody thinks that they have achieved their quote, they've successfully bargained for their quote, but really their initial compensation is less than that, and the difference has been made up by a prepayment of a residual, so that when it now comes time for folks to get their residual, because the show is an exhibition, they are unpleasantly surprised to learn that that residual is now not forthcoming, because they already got it and they didn't realize they got it as part of their initial compensation. So there are a number of things that have been done in this cycle to try to solve that problem, to create additional transparency, so you know how much of that money is initial comp versus how much of that money is residuals. The first thing is there has to be a separate rider, a separate document that actually breaks down for you this much of the money is initial comp, and this much of the money is the advance payment of a residual, so that it's very clear and transparent. In addition to that, with the exception of a direct deposit circumstance, you're going to get a separate check, so that your initial compensation check is going to come in the way that your initial compensation ordinarily comes, and the advance payment of your residual is going to be processed through the union like a residual, so that when you get it, it's going to be really obvious to you, this is residual money, this is not part of my initial comp. So it will help to cure that confusion. If you're getting your money direct deposited, then the advance pay of residuals can be deposited at the same time, but you do have to get reporting in connection with that is going to break it down for you and tell you how much of what just got deposited is initial comp and how much of that is the advance payment of a residual. So that is also part of the better reporting that you see on that slide, so that it's going to be much clearer to you now what money is initial comp and what is advance pay. In addition to that, there is a new limitation on what can be advance pay to you, that for somebody who is making less than $75,000 per week or per episode is going to cap the amount that can be advance paid out of your residuals to 15% of what you're making, so that there's a maximum now on what can be advance paid to you. In addition to that, which is not actually on the slide, but the thresholds that currently exist for advance pay have all been increased. So the contract right now has a series of thresholds, and only money that you are being paid in excess of those amounts can be used for the advance payment of a residual, and all those figures have gone up, so that there's less money available to advance pay and more of your money has to be treated as initial comp, which is what we want. So a number of different things have been done to try to solve the problem of people being advance paid money that they actually think is initial comp. Yeah, you can applaud for that. Transparency is good. We've also achieved some improvements in the residual formula for high-budget SVOD, that's high-budget programs made for streaming. This is in addition to the streaming bonus that we just talked about. Also, the baseline residual has been significantly improved. So you understand how these improvements will work. I just remind us that the way this residual works, it starts with what you made on the episode. So whatever your pay was, that's called total actual compensation in contract language. And that's where you start with for calculating the residual. That amount is subjected to a cap. So it gets capped off in terms of how much of that money gets counted in the formula. It then gets multiplied by a percentage. And that percentage goes down every year. Every exhibition year of the show, the residual gets smaller because that percentage decreases. And then that percentage, once you generate that amount of money, that is also further adjusted based on the size of the platform. So if you're on a platform like Netflix that has a lot of subscribers, that amount goes up. If you're on a tiny new platform, that amount could go down. So it's adjusted by the size of the platform. So with that as the basics, to explain the improvements, the first thing that I'll talk about is the caps that I mentioned before, where your income is subjected to a cap for purpose of this formula. All those caps went up by 2.5%. As well, the actual percentage, the exhibition year percentage that got multiplied against, those percentages went up for years 8 through 12. So for programs that have been on the platform longer, that percentage gets higher and it generates more money for you. I mentioned that then gets adjusted by a subscriber factor. That accounts for how many subscribers the platform has. The lowest two subscriber factors were eliminated so that the ones that would decrease your residual the most, those subscriber factors don't exist anymore, and you start with the 65% factor. Other improvements that were made include a completely separate now foreign residual that is based on foreign subscribers. Up until this point, your residual for foreign exhibition in this area is 35% of your domestic residual, and that's how it was calculated. We now have a whole different set of foreign subscriber factors that are going to be applied to the same formula. So you're going to calculate your foreign residual the way I described the calculation of the domestic residual, but there's going to be a different set of foreign subscriber factors so that based on how big the foreign footprint of that platform is, your money's going to be adjusted up or down on that basis. But the net result of a separately calculated foreign residual is going to be a very substantial increase, like a 76% increase in that residual. So that gets to increase by a lot. We also eliminated the 35% crediting from 35% of scale crediting that apply to certain smaller platforms as part of how this was initially bargained. That's gone, so that's good for us. We don't want that crediting. That's money that you then get to keep. And grandfathering was eliminated for any new seasons of an existing series. So this formula has been improving since it first got into the book in 2014, and there were some shows that were still using the old formula for those shows. No more of that. We now have the new formula that's going to be applicable to all seasons of all shows. And as you can see in the last bullet, there's going to be improved transparency. I mean, one of the issues that we have had in the area of streaming is that it's a black box in terms of things like viewership. Like, you used to be able to rely on things like Nielsen to tell you how well or poorly a show was doing, how many people were watching it. That has never been the case for streaming, but we are now going to get that viewership information is going to get reported to us by the company, so we're going to have much greater visibility into how your work is doing. Yeah, all of that is worth definitely applauding for. All right, I'll move on. Some additional residuals changes. There's been a modification agreed to for the promotional reruns when launching a new primetime series. Up until now, it's been the first rerun of the first 3 episodes that are allowed to be done without payment. That can now be any 3 episodes, so it doesn't have to be the first 3. Some of these are producer provisions, just to be honest, that we agreed to. So that's one of them. They can now pick any 3 episodes. There is a provision for limited theatrical release of a television program that allows them to pay a percentage of distributors' gross receipts-based residual, basically a percentage of whatever license fee they get for that. And that has been expanded to include high-budget SVOD pictures, 66 minutes or longer. So there's a new category eligible for that residual. There has been a modification to the theatrical promotional exhibitions. It used to be that this only applied to a show that had not yet exhibited its last episode. That condition has been removed, so it can be a show. It can be a show now that has exhibited its last episode. The foreign overage thresholds have been increased by 3%. This has to do with the way residuals are paid for foreign free television, where it starts off as 35% of minimum, you get a fixed residual, and then once the license fee exceeds a certain amount, you start getting more money. The amount that has to be exceeded went up by 3%. That's what that means. And finally, there were some adjustments to how we are doing new media inspections that are really not that consequential, but instead of being, it is now annual instead of biannual, and it's 30 days notice instead of 10 days notice. So some of those technical provisions have been adjusted. I will move on from there and talk about the casting process. This was definitely an issue that generated a lot of energy in our wages and working conditions process. It was very clear members felt ill-treated by the self-tape process and that there was a real need for regulations, and we have established a lot of regulations now around self-tape. The first of which is reasonable turnaround times. So you now have to be given at least 48 hours, excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. So you get your weekends back from self-taping. If you are a minor, that's going to be 72 hours for minors to do a self-tape. There are now page limits that apply in terms of how much material they can ask you to record on a first audition, a first self-tape of 8 pages and 12 pages for a second or subsequent self-tape. They cannot require memorization of a self-tape. They have to allow you to hold sides or use a prompter. There's now increased transparency on whether the role is cast. So you have the right to ask now whether the role has been cast, and they have to endeavor to answer you and tell you whether that role has been cast. They cannot require any paid editing software or any specific equipment for a self-tape. There is now a limitation on what they can ask you on the slate. So it's a standard slate that you're now going to be asked for every self-tape. They cannot ask for nudity or for anything more revealing than a swimsuit you would wear at a public pool. They cannot ask for stunts. If you're a dancer doing a self-tape, they have to provide you with the music. They have to provide you with the choreography. The amount that they can ask you to do is limited to 4 8-beat counts. And it has to be something that can be performed in an 8x8 space. So, dancers that live in apartments can still self-tape their auditions. And they can only request solo performances. So they cannot say to you, as they have done to dancers, go recruit some of your friends to do partner dances or multi-person dances. None of that. They can only request solo performances. The self-tape itself has to be securely stored somewhere where only people that have a legitimate business purpose in doing so can access it. If they ever want to make a public use of your self-tape, they have to get your permission, and they have to get your permission at the time they're going to do it, not when you're submitting the self-tape and people are going to be incentivized to say yes to anything. No, at the time they want to do it, they have to come back and get your consent. And they have to also provide you with an opportunity to do either a Zoom audition or an in-person audition if you're one of our members that doesn't particularly like self-taping or don't feel like you do your best work on a self-tape. There's going to be a Zoom or an in-person option. So from zero to a whole lot of regulation on self-tapes. Thank you. More on the casting process. For virtual interviews and auditions, they have the same increased transparency obligation on whether the role has been cast. You can ask that, and they have to endeavor to answer you. No paid software, no paid editing software or specific equipment for a virtual audition as well. Again, no memorization without payment, so they have to let you hold your sides or use a prompter, and no nudity. Again, you can't wear anything more revealing than a swimsuit you would wear at a public pool in a virtual interview. And as well, there's a provision that they cannot ask you to remove a cover-up until such time as you are in a private virtual setting with casting only, like not in the waiting room. They cannot ask for stunts at a virtual interview or audition. Same rules for dancers. They have to provide you with the music. It's limited to 4 8-beat counts. The same requirement, it has to be doable in an 8x8 space and solo performances only. They have to securely store it if they decide to record it. And once again, if they want to use it publicly someday, when they decide they want to do that, they got to come back to you and get your consent for that. All of this that I have talked about with self-tapes and virtual interviews and auditions, there's a specific dispute resolution process for that. This was a big fight to get any dispute resolution process here. The producers very much wanted to do this on the honor system. Yeah, that was our reaction too. So there's a 6-month moratorium on claims while they figure out how to comply with all this stuff, but they have asked us to bring to their attention any violations. So we say to you as well, bring to our attention any violations so we can bring it to their attention and they can use their 6 months effectively to become in compliance. Once that 6 months is over, any claims will be referred to a conciliation committee where we will try to resolve it, and if it can't be resolved, it will go to grievance and arbitration, and we will bring it in front of an arbitrator. New regulations on general casting calls. So we have protections now that say that you cannot do this in a way that requires a performer to pay any fee, and you cannot give people who do pay a fee any preferential treatment in the casting process. So that is going to affect how, businesses like Actors Access are able to do their work. It's not a prohibition on offering people an upgraded level of service if you want it, but they have to also give you a way to submit yourself, get the audition materials without paying anything, and not lose anything but in terms of a lack of preferential treatment if you choose that option. They have agreed to have a meeting with us to discuss payment discrepancies in different geographic markets. Some of our folks feel very much that they are discriminated against. There are folks that are outside of LA and New York in particular in terms of how roles are cast and paid in those markets, so we're going to talk to them about that. And there are obligations now spelled out where they have to accommodate performers with disabilities, they have to accommodate seniors, and they have to accommodate minors in the casting process. So lots of new stuff in the casting process, and I will now turn it back to you.
Great, thanks so much, Ray. So now let's talk about pension and health. So there are significant increases to the benefit plan contributions for episodic work in the form of increases to the caps, the episodic caps. And that is projected to generate over $180 million over the term of this contract to the benefit plans in additional contributions. So the increases in contributions not only benefit the plans by bringing more money into the plans, but it also helps the performers who are working on those shows to continue to gain eligibility because they'll also gain eligibility for those earnings. And so in half-hour series, half-hour episodes, that increase is 67%. The cap goes from $15,000 to $25,000 for contributions on those earnings. And on our series, it went up by 43%, from $24,500 to $35,000 per episode. Those are very substantial increases, and it's very gratifying to see those caps increase because they haven't been increased for a very long time. And we're really excited that we were able to accomplish that. Continuing on, let's talk about performance capture. So after more than 2 decades of trying to achieve formal recognition of performance capture, which is work that is done by our members under our contracts every day, and yet the companies have cycle after cycle refused to take on a formal acknowledgement of that. In this contract, for the first time, the companies acknowledge coverage of performance capture services, both for live action, theatrical and television motion pictures, and also for animated theatrical motion pictures. So that's, yes. Work that's done under the performance capture provisions will be covered by the terms of the applicable schedules. So depending on what type of work you're doing, schedules A, B, C, F, G, H, J, with some exceptions. And I do want to note, one of the things that we were not able to achieve in this round, but we certainly be going back to get in a future round of bargaining, is full application of consecutive employment and drops and pickups rules to performance capture. That was something we tried hard to get. We weren't able to get there on that point, but it's not something we're going to forget about or leave behind. I do also want to note that this provision does not cover motion capture services as defined, and it also doesn't cover reference capture or reference modeling. Reference capture and reference modeling in particular is something that has long been acknowledged as not something that's covered under this contract. But that's certainly, the definitions of that are something we'll want to push on as well in future rounds of bargaining to help make sure it's really clear that the exception for motion capture is very, very limited. Continuing on from performance capture, next let's talk about Schedule F. So we have been able to get substantial increases in Schedule F thresholds, which will result in more money in people's pockets, Schedule F performers' pockets. And the reason why, for those of you who aren't that familiar with Schedule F, if you're compensated in accordance with the Schedule F minimums, then some things become freely bargainable or negotiable that otherwise aren't under the contract. So there's an incentive for employers to pay people at least at Schedule F minimums if they're going to make use of them in that sort of way. So here are some of the increases that are happening to those minimums, which haven't increased for a while also. First of all, in theatrical motion pictures, that Schedule F threshold is going to go from $65,000 to $80,000. For half-hour TV and new media motion pictures, it's going to go from $32,000 to $37,500. For 1 hour and longer TV and new media motion pictures, it'll go from $32,000 to $45,000. And for multi-part closed-end motion pictures, or miniseries, from $40,000 to $47,500 per picture, and from more than $4,650 a week to more than $5,150 a week. So what that amounts to is a range of increases from 17 to 40% in the thresholds for Schedule F performers, and I think that will translate into significant additional earnings as well as greater protections for our members working below that threshold. Let's see. Is that me? This is you, right? Okay.
All right, let's talk about series regulars and options. These are the provisions that regulate when your option has to be exercised, and when you have to return to work after your option is exercised. So the first set of important changes is to the money break. Right now, the only people who have the benefit of these limitations on options in the contract are people who are making at least or making less than $32,000 an episode. Those numbers are going to go up. That number is going to go up for a half-hour program to $65,000 per episode, and for an hour program to $70,000 per episode. It will stay at $32,000 only for minors on children's programming. So that means many more people are going to have the benefit of the option protections that are in the collective bargaining agreement. How those option protections work will also change. The option period is now going to be 18 months, but it's from commencement of principal photography of the prior season. So the entire production period of that season of your show is going to count towards your option window, which is not how it works now. Right now it's 12 months, but it starts only after your production period is completed. So this is going to be 18 months starting from the commencement of principal photography. It will be subject to a maximum of 3 extensions of up to 3 months each. But for each such extension, they're going to pay an episodic fee that is not creditable against future money. So that means it's new money that they have to pay to extend your option period, and there's a limit on how many times they can do it and how long those extensions can be. Another element of the change, and this is brand new for the AMPTP agreement, is that there is now a regulation around when they have to start you or start paying you for the subsequent season. Up until now, we've had option regulations that say when they have to exercise the option and tell you, yeah, we're bringing you back for the next season, but there was no regulation around when they actually have to start you working on that season or start paying you on that season, which led to long gaps between the option being exercised and people actually going to work. Now the rule will say they have 3 months from the end of the option period to get you back to work or start paying you. They can extend that once for up to 2 months, but they have to pay you now for your subsequent season episodic fee in exchange for that extension. Again, that's non-creditable, so it's separate new money that they have to pay you, and that is the only extension that they get as far as returning you to work. And then the last element to talk about here relates to people who are not eligible for these option protections because they are at or over the money break. So people who are making $65,000 or $70,000 or more, there are still folks who are in that category who, because they have been held out of the market for so long, have lost their health insurance coverage because they've been unable to go get other work and earn eligibility. And there's now a provision that if that happens, if you are over that money break and you lose your health insurance while you are under option, that employer is now going to have to go to the health plan and make a special payment to extend your health coverage, so you will not lose your health coverage in that situation. All right, go on from there. Okay, we'll talk about another improvement for series regulars. This is in their relocation allowance. This is what you are paid if you are engaged on a show. Let's say you're an LA-based performer, but your show's actually being made in Atlanta. Right now, what they have to pay you is $10,000 per season for either 2 or 4 seasons, depending on the size of the series order, and that's it. Then their obligation is over. Those rules are going to be changed moving forward so that it's now they have to pay you $5,000 a month for up to 6 months. So that's a maximum of $30,000, which is obviously a tripling of the money, but as well, there's now no limit on the number of seasons. So it's not 2 seasons or 4 seasons. It's for as long as you're on the job. This shows some of the math based on employment patterns. This is a 153% effective increase in relocation allowances. The one exception to this that I'll mention is if you are already a series regular on a show and you have exhausted the maximum number of relocation allowances that you are entitled to for that show, this does not restart the clock for you in that situation. So those folks will have to either bargain for that or this will become applicable on their next gig. Move on from here, Duncan. The span provisions have also been improved. So the span money break that you see here, this is the minimum that you have to be paid in order for an employer to bargain freely on the subject of overall production time, the total amount of time within which your services must occur and be finished. That number has not changed for many, many years, but in this cycle we did achieve an improvement from $20,000 to $25,000 per episode, from $100,000 to $125,000 for a series presented in a combined series format, and from $150,000 to $190,000 for a 13-episode guarantee. So for the first time, we have increased the span money break. Some provisions now that are intended to benefit, in particular, recurring guest stars. Right now, under the collective bargaining agreement, you can be engaged without a start date. So they can hire you for the episode without telling you when your work is going to commence on that episode. And that has really been a problem, in particular for recurring guest stars, because it means there are long periods of the year when that individual cannot firmly commit themselves to another project. They can't represent themselves as being available for another project because they don't know when they're going to have to start on their recurring guest star gig. So we've made an improvement in this area. They now have to provide you minimally with a soft work window, and that is whatever your guaranteed period of employment is, whatever the guaranteed amount of employment is, plus or minus 5 days. That's the soft work window, so they have to at least give you that as an indication of when your work is meant to occur. And if you get a job during that soft work window, you go back to the employer. They have 24 hours, excluding weekends and holidays, to either tell you, we're going to give you a conflicting work date, so we're going to tell you when you're coming to work, and or they can say to you, we're going to move the soft work window in order to accommodate your job so that you can take the job that you got. If they move the soft work window to accommodate your job, and it turns out that it's impossible to reschedule you to a period where you're available, then they don't have to pay except for the work that you already did. So if there's a balance on your guaranteed in that one situation, they would not have to pay out the balance of that guarantee. But this collectively represents a serious improvement over the status quo where they can just tell you nothing about when it is you're going to work. So. We'll move on to the major role provisions. There's been an expansion in the application of major role so that the major role minimums, the higher minimums that you can get based on your billing, now applies to half an hour and hour high budget SVOD series for the first time. As well, it will apply now to the first season of a pay TV series. Previously, it had only applied to the second and subsequent seasons in pay TV. So this is more money for folks that achieve this billing on more shows. I'll talk through as well 2 new forms of engagement that we agreed to here. They may be familiar to some of you who have worked under the Netflix deal. These are the modified deal performer and the modified guest performer forms of engagement. If you're engaged as a modified deal performer, they have to guarantee you at least, the number is now $21,538 per episode in order to use this form of engagement, and that number is going to go up and continue to go up by general wage increases. If they do that, if they engage you this way and guarantee you at least this amount per episode, they get 10 work days per episode and 30 overall production days per episode. So for each such episode, they can get 10 days of your services that can occur within a 30-day window, and you are free to take other jobs outside of the actual work days. Your residuals are going to be based in that case on total applicable minimum salary based on 2 weeks at scale for each episode. And they can multiply this across multiple episodes. So this could be used for like a recurring guest type situation as well, where they hire you on this basis. There's a junior version of the modified deal performer, the modified guest performer. You have to be guaranteed at least $14,000 per episode. That's also going to go up with the general wage increases. In exchange for that, they get 8 work days per episode to occur within a 23-day period per episode. So 8 work days within 23 overall production days. The residuals will be calculated based on 1 week and 3 prorated days. And in terms of how these days get scheduled under either the modified deal or the modified guest performer, when you are engaged, they have to tell you what your work days will be for the first 30-day period or 23-day period if it's the modified deal. So that's to give you enough lead time to try to find other jobs on the days that you're not actually scheduled to work. And then going forward, they're going to have to give you at least 14 days advance notice of your work days. Again, the idea is to give lead time to people so that you can try to find other work on the days that you're not working under your modified deal or modified guest form of engagement. So I'll move on from there. Consecutive employment. We have agreed that for a day player on a series or a mini-series, they can have up to 3 drop pickups per episode. And they can use a soft pickup date, so they can give you the date plus or minus 4 days, and they can pick you up on the pickup side as either a daily, a 3-day, or a weekly. For weekly performers on series and miniseries, they can have up to 2 drop pickups per episode. It's the same soft pickup date. They can give you the date plus or minus 4 days, and again, they can pick up as a daily, a 3-day, or a weekly. We have some provisions. Again, this and the consecutive employment stuff should also be familiar if anyone's worked under the Netflix contract on franchise projects. And that's defined as a series of related projects that have common settings, characters, and/or storylines. So the way this will work is if you are engaged on more than one franchise project at the same time, you're working on 2 franchise projects, and there's a day that's a whole day on one franchise project, but a work day on the other. You'll get paid for the work day, but not the whole day. And for reuse of photography purposes, they can ask you to consent at the time of engagement, except for nudity and bloopers, to be able to reuse photography or soundtrack from one franchise project into another franchise project, but only into another franchise project.
Before we move on, we should just emphasize, for those of you who might be thinking about stuff we've talked about regarding franchise projects as it relates to the AI provisions, those provisions are gone. There is no franchise project concept in the AI provisions anymore. Only that multi-picture deal concept that we talked about, but not a franchise concept at all.
All right, another breakthrough for us in this negotiation was the establishment of terms for high-budget advertiser-supported video on demand. This area right now is completely free bargaining. No scale attaches to work for advertiser-supported new media platform, and only certain limited terms out of the television agreement apply here. Now, for high-budget AVOD programs that meet the same budget test as a high-budget SVOD program, the TV terms are going to apply and scale is going to apply, so it's going to be treated a lot like television work or high-budget SVOD work. All of that is going to apply with certain exceptions. There are certain terms that are going to apply based on the 2020 contract rather than the 2023 contract. So there are some of those terms that will lag a little bit, but otherwise it's going to be the same terms as TV or high-budget SVOD. The way the residual is going to work is your initial compensation is going to pay for 26 weeks of availability on the AVOD platform, and then you're going to get a 6% of distributors' gross receipts residual plus P&H for further exhibition on that platform. If it goes to a paid new media platform like subscription streaming, transactional video, etc., these are the standard residuals that apply across our contract. It's a 3.6% residual for that. That's inclusive of P&H. And if it goes to traditional media, TV, home video, etc., all the traditional residual formulas are going to apply to the traditional media exhibition of a high-budget AVOD program. So these high-budget AVOD terms are now going to look a lot like the high-budget SVOD terms. And again, that's supplanting what is now free bargaining, so this is a big leap forward for high-budget AVOD.
Okay, let's talk about background actors. Have I got some background actors in the house? Woo! All right, it's good to see you all. So we have an unprecedented wage pattern for background actors, and I want to say one of the reasons why our background actors are going to get a larger initial wage increase than anybody else is because we all know that the impact of inflation is felt most heavily by those who are earning at the lowest end of the scale. That's a reality because when necessities go up in price, it's a necessity. It's called a necessity for a reason, and you can't just cut them out or have less of rent or less of food. So we took that very seriously, and we did focus our efforts to make sure that that would be accounted for. And so in this contract, there will also be a two-step increase in the first year for background actors. That started with an 11% general wage increase effective November 9th, and will be supplemented by a 4% general increase effective on July 1st, meaning a compounded first-year wage increase of 15.51% for background. Yeah, I think that is a good result and definitely addresses the impact of inflation that's hit all of us, but especially background actors during the last several years. There will also, thank you so much, there will also be another 3.5% increase, just like in all of the other general wage increase patterns, effective July 1st of 2025. I want to just note that background representatives on this negotiating committee fought hard alongside all the rest of us for background gains in this contract. And one of the things we really fought for was to achieve what we called a single Schedule X, meaning eliminating the differences in background terms between the East Coast and the West Coast. Now, before you clap for that, I tell you, we didn't get a single Schedule X. We were not able to achieve everything out of that, but we were able to achieve what I personally believe is the most important part of that, which is equalizing the number of covered background positions on jobs between the East and the West Coast. And so upon the ratification of this agreement, there will no longer be any difference in the number of covered jobs for background on television or on theatrical between the East Coast and the West Coast. And what that means is a projected increase of 10,700 workdays per year, covered workdays for background, as a result of that equalization. And I just want you to know that doesn't mean we've given up on a vision of a single Schedule X. It means we'll be coming back to that again in the future, but it also means that having equalized the background number counts on both coasts, that we have achieved a very significant part of that, and I'm very proud of that, and I'm proud of our committee members for making that happen. Just some other gains in the background area for stand-ins who work on half-hour multicam shows, who rehearse and or perform in the role of a cast member during a run-through. They are going to receive a $150 adjustment. And P&H will be paid on that $150 adjustment as well, so that will help with earning health and pension eligibility. Also, photo doubles who are required to memorize and deliver scripted dialogue on camera will receive an additional $150 adjustment as well, also plus P&H. And we've also agreed to make the same as what we have in the principal part of the contract, that late pay will be tolled, which means put on a hold, if there is a bona fide dispute over a payment that's made under the contract. So that's an equalization there. It doesn't mean late pay is going away. It just means if there actually is a legitimate contract interpretation dispute or factual dispute, that late pay will be suspended while that dispute is resolved. Continuing on, I think this is still me. Yes, stunt coordinators. So we have achieved, for the first time in this contract, fixed residuals for television stunt coordinators who are not performing on-camera stunts. The way that this is structured, first of all, I need to say, it will take effect a year after ratification. So this takes effect approximately December of next year. But the important thing is breaking the company's resistance to this, because as I'm sure you all are aware, the companies have been maybe not welcoming, but open to the idea of taking pooled residuals and adding stunt coordinators to that. But when they've had to actually pay extra for fixed residuals, that's where they've drawn the line. We were able to break past that in our contract with Netflix previously, and we were finally able to break past that in this negotiation with the AMPTP. And we are eager to continue working on this to expand upon those residuals for stunt coordinators as well. Also, we had a priority in this negotiation to attempt to equalize the rates for flat deal stunt coordinators between television and theatrical. While we weren't able to get all the way there with equalization, we were able to achieve outsized increases for television flat deal coordinators of 10% in the first year, 6.5%, and then 5%, which doesn't get us all the way to equalization, but takes us a big chunk of the way there, and that's something that I think is a good thing. And finally, we had received reports that our flat deal stunt coordinators' time was being abused, and they were being brought in way too early and kept way too late beyond when they were needed on set, and this was eating into their rest periods. And I'm sure all of us can agree that the last people that we want to have inadequate rest are stunt coordinators. So after bringing this issue to the attention of the AMPTP, they've agreed to issue a bulletin to producers instructing them not to have flat deal stunt coordinators come out any earlier than necessary to supervise stunt activity, and not to keep them any longer than necessary to do that as well. And we'll certainly be monitoring to make sure that there's compliance with that. Okay, moving on to singers. So first of all, vocal contractors will now have that vocal contractor fee paid on top of multi-tracking or sweetening, so that's a gain for singers. And singers who are required to dance, whether in rehearsal or on camera, are going to receive a 25% bump of the applicable dancer rate, so that singers who are required to dance will no longer be expected to do that additional work for free. It will be part of that additional adjustment for that rate. And likewise, for dancers, it's not actually the first bullet, but I'll go there since it's parallel. Dancers who are required to sing or lip sync, whether in rehearsal or on camera, will also receive a bump of an increase of 25% of the applicable singer rate, so that dancers who are required to do that are not doing that work without getting additional compensation for it either. So I'm very pleased about that. Also, and if I were a dancer, I would certainly be very, very, very happy about this. We are eliminating rehearsal rates completely. Rehearsal rates will now be paid exactly the same as on-camera days. And I just want to commend the dancer community and our dancer rep on the committee who helped make that case to the producers that rehearsal days are not only often as hard, but often harder than on-camera days. And so a discounted rate for those days is no longer going to be a thing. And finally, the companies have agreed to increase their efforts to make warm-up space available adjacent to the set, so that the purpose of warming up is not defeated by having to travel a distance to get to set after warming up. And so we'll be monitoring compliance with that commitment as well. Next, talking about holidays. We have 2 new holidays effective January 1st of next year: Martin Luther King Jr. Day and Juneteenth. I'm very happy about it, although I have to say, I don't know if you react the same way I do, is like, Martin Luther King Jr. Day is not already a holiday in this contract? How is that not even a thing? I can't believe this industry has let this go for this long, but it is now a holiday in this contract, and also Juneteenth, and rightfully so. So very pleased about that. Speaking about equity and inclusion issues, first of all, we have achieved an agreement to provide additional access to health care in a couple of ways. First of all, just for those who might not already know it, our health plan already has a benefit to make sure that if our members who are working on location somewhere are in a jurisdiction that doesn't allow equal access to reproductive health care, the health plan will provide for travel expenses for them to return to their home or to another location to get that access to health care. But there was a gap. Yeah, and yes, thank you for that. I agree. That's been in place for a little while, but there's been a gap because obviously we sometimes have members who are working in those locations who are not receiving benefits under the health plan, who aren't eligible for whatever reason. And so now the companies have agreed that there will be funding provided for a benefit to cover that kind of travel for any member working under our contracts in such a jurisdiction, regardless of their eligibility for the health plan. We also have agreed to make a joint recommendation to the trustees of the health plan to expand that travel benefit for reproductive care to include gender-affirming care as well. And that will also be covered under the benefit that I just mentioned for people who aren't eligible for the health plan. So those two pieces will both be covered as part of the agreement that we've reached here. As far as translation goes, there will now be a prohibition on translation of your own or any other performer's sides, in the sense that that is not work that's covered under our contract, and if the producer wants to engage you to do that, then they need to bargain separately and pay you separately for doing that translation work. Continuing on, as to stunt doubling, there's now a requirement that the producers consult with the union to identify additional sources for qualified stunt performers if they feel that they are unable to find a stunt performer who resembles the performer that they're doubling. This is designed to help reduce and hopefully ultimately eliminate inappropriate wiggings and paint downs where, I mean, it is a problematic practice that should come to an end, and they're going to now have to consult with the union so we can help them, if they can't find them themselves, find qualified stunt performers to avoid the need for wigging and paint downs. Also, on hair and makeup equity, we were able to achieve a consultation right for all principal performers if they are, yes, that's right, principal performers who may have concerns about whether a production is going to provide qualified hair and makeup artists who can work with their particular hair type or their complexion or whatever. And the AMPTP is going to provide a notice to producers regarding that requirement, and there's also a requirement that they provide appropriate tools and equipment to work on performers' hair of all types and all complexions. One of the things that unfortunately we were not able to achieve in this negotiation was the application of this new rule to background actors, and it's very disappointing that we weren't able to achieve that, but I promise you it remains on our top of our agenda, and we will continue to pursue that until the companies acknowledge that the same type of protections ought to apply to background actors in this area. There's also a commitment made in this contract to work together, the AMPTP, us, and industry partners, including the industry union, relevant industry unions, to expand and maintain a pool of qualified hairstylists and makeup artists, and to fund training so that that pool can grow. Continuing on equity and inclusion, I want to talk a little bit about sharing of self-identification data. So we have agreed with the industry to share aggregated diversity statistics back and forth between the companies and the union at least once per year so that everyone can have a better sense of what kind of progress is being made in ensuring that there is an accurate and adequate reflection of the American scene in the work that these companies are providing and what's going up on screen. And on the far right, you'll see there's an elimination of casting data reports. And this is a really important development because we no longer want the producers to have some random PA looking at people and deciding, is someone a certain ethnicity? Has someone got a particular disability? Is someone a certain gender? Instead, we have a new strategy for dealing with this that I'm extremely excited about, which uses our own internal diversity census and the data that we have on our members, combines that with industry reporting so we can get accurate figures based on self-identification about how the industry is doing in inclusion. And this is going to be particularly important. It's important for everybody, and thank you for your enthusiasm, Michelle. But it's, I know you do, but it's particularly important for our performers with disability members because up until now, the companies have fought even doing that sort of reporting that we just talked about. And now that we'll be able to use self-identification combined with job data, we will be able to have a much better picture of what's happening with respect to performers with disabilities in this industry. We also are updating the contract to reflect, at long last, gender-neutral language. And so I think we'll all be very pleased to see that. And next, on to sexual harassment prevention. A number of important gains here, the first of which is there is finally a requirement in this contract for the producers to use best efforts to engage intimacy coordinators for all scenes involving nudity or simulated sex, period. And for any other kind of intimate scene, actors have the right to request an intimacy coordinator, and there is an explicit provision prohibiting any retaliation against any member, any actor, any performer for requesting an intimacy coordinator. So I just want to acknowledge this is the result of years of work building capacity, helping certify training programs, helping more intimacy coordinators get certified and enrolled on our registry, so there are enough intimacy coordinators to actually fulfill the needs of this industry in doing this. And so I think that's a really great accomplishment. We're also going to have significantly improved notification to all members, performers, background actors regarding non-discrimination and anti-harassment policies, including specific instructions for reporting violations. And that'll be made available not only in your start paperwork, but through things like call sheets, posting in background holding areas, and other places where our members are likely to see those notices and have access to that information. For background actors, for the first time, there is a requirement of advance notice if a role includes any kind of nudity or simulated sex, and that notice has to be provided prior to the audition or interview, if known, in a casting notice, and at least 48 hours in advance of call time. And that notice can be provided by the background casting agency, so that background actors are no longer put in a position of having to make snap on-the-spot decisions about whether they do or don't want to accept work that involves nudity or simulated sex. And finally, we have an increase in training with a commitment to reviewing and updating the industry's training programs, harassment prevention programs, and to also improve on best practices for scenes that have or involve nudity or simulated sex, and for handling any kind of triggering scene in a trauma-informed manner so that our members can be at their best when performing their work and not have to worry about those things being handled correctly. So we're very excited about that. And I know you're like, is this presentation ever going to come to an end? And the answer is yes, we're almost there. But there was so much that we had to create this last slide, which, as you can see, contains a whole bunch of other things that are in this. We didn't want anyone to think we were leaving anything out, but we also knew that this presentation couldn't go on literally forever. I do know that there's a question I think Mr. Jolliffe wanted to ask about looping, which is the second bullet on this, and then I'll ask Ray if there's any of these we want to highlight in particular, or maybe he and I can do that together. But David, do you want to ask your question?
Sure, thanks. First of all, hi everybody, welcome, and thank you for being here. Before I ask my question, I just want to reiterate one thing that I want to make sure does not fall silent on all of us, was the raising of the caps, those pension and health caps of $180 million. You may know or not know that some of us were a little upset 3 years ago to what might have happened to certain people in our health plan. And all of us collectively are very, very happy, and we have told the trustees, we've directed to them that that money should be used to help mitigate some of those things that happened 3 years ago. So we're very excited about that. My question, Duncan, is that being a voiceover performer myself, is that we voiceover performers feel that we're in the first line of fire when it comes to artificial intelligence. And I want you to just go on a little bit about the protections that we've put in place, especially for our loopers, who are extremely concerned right now that they're going to be replaced by AI. So I'd like you just to talk about that and reassure everyone that that's not the case, that we've done everything we can to put in place protections to make sure, especially for group loopers, that work is not going to disappear.
Yeah, no, thanks, David. I appreciate that. So first of all, let me say, I think we all recognize that voice actors are at the, on the cutting edge of what's happening with AI, just because of technology and the fact that it's technically easier at this moment for them to do things with voice only than it is for them to do things with audio visual. So we've been mindful of that, and that was definitely something we had at the forefront of our thoughts as we planned for and carried out this negotiation and strike. So a few things that I would say to loopers. Number one, or really to any kind of voiceover actor, the protections that we have for digital replication of your voice are equally strong as the protections for digital replication of your face or your body or your performance. And so a voice performance is equally protected as any other type of performance in digital replication. If they want to create a digital replica of your voice, they must get your informed consent, just like we talked about before. If they want to make use of that digital replica, they have to pay for that in accordance with the provisions that we talked about, whether it's an employment-based digital replica or an independently created one. And so all of those protections are in place. But I think one of the things that voice actors in particular are concerned about are synthetic voices. In other words, the creation of an artificial voice that's not meant to be a digital replica of a particular performer's voice. And how can you feel confident that that's not going to overtake all of those jobs that you were talking about during the term of this contract? That's one of the reasons why it was so important for us to hold out for generative AI protections that we did. And while we do not have a union consent provision, we don't have something where we can just say, no, we're blocking it all, our strategy for making sure that those jobs don't go away is the following. Number one, there is a notice requirement in the event that that is ever done. We don't know for sure if it will be done by these companies under this contract, but if it is, they have to tell us. And number two, we have the ability to negotiate for compensation and for consideration for that. And our strategy, of course, will be to, as I mentioned before, for other types of performers, to negotiate compensation that makes that economically non-advantageous for the companies. Because one thing we can always count on is their determination to do everything in the cheapest possible way. And so if we make sure that it's more expensive to use a synthetic voice to replace someone, then they will not have an incentive to do it. And so that's what we'll be doing during the term of this contract. And of course, continuing to monitor how this develops. And if we find that that approach is either leaving gaps or not adequately protecting it, then we'll address it in 2.5 years. And I want to acknowledge, I don't think that answer is going to take away all fear of loopers or frankly anybody else, nor should it. A certain amount of fear can be healthy because it keeps us focused on the right priorities and makes sure that we know this is something that needs attention. But it is, in my view, it is a very significant level of protection. So I think that it does give some assurance to our loopers and others that during the term of this contract, that's not going to happen. And when we come back to the bargaining table in 2.5 years, we'll continue to fight for even greater protections to help make sure, as this technology develops, that that doesn't happen.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Thank you.
No, thanks for the question, David. And I know, Ray, there were a few of these. I don't know if we need to go through all of them because then we should have just made slides for each and every one of them. But I guess we can just say there are significant improvements in many of these areas. Maybe if people want to ask questions about any of these topics, then we can respond with details. Or you can just look in the summary and you can see for yourself what the changes are that relate to each of these areas, just so we can get on to the questions and answers. I know we want to make sure there's plenty of time for that. Is that all right? Yeah. Great. Okay, well then I think our last slide is just one that reminds you that you can find this information online at sagaftra.org/contracts2023. There is the summary. There is an explainer regarding AI. There are FAQs, and quite a lot of them. And basically, whenever we're hearing questions that get asked more than once or more than a few times, we're trying to add them to the FAQs on the website. So please check those out. And I guess there's some questions. I wasn't sure if there would be any.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask that question I asked yesterday, but not immediately.
Oh, I'm going to ask that question.
Oh, yeah.
Can I ask that question right now?
Yeah.
Oh, can I say
My
it
main
next
question?
to you?
Yeah, if you want to pop, no.
Hello?
Yeah, no, we can do it together. I'll ask it because we have 1 minute. So you can
So I guess I'm supposed to remind everybody of what the procedure is for this. However, I've flipped too many pages in my document. So.
This is going to be the rest of the night.
Oh, great. Okay.
Oh, no. I just, because I was going to call them the question.
She's gonna
Also,
share.
there's just a
good.
little bit of a line. Rest assured, you guys, that we're going to get to everybody we can until the Palladium or the cops or somebody kicks us out of the room, okay? So we're going to get to as many of you as possible.
Okay. All right, are we ready?
Oh, yeah. So ready.
So I'm going to go,
check.
hello,
Check, check.
We have a check on each of these mics.
Check.
Can we
Microphone
settle
check.
down, please?
Check, check, check.
Okay.
All right.
Also, if your question has already been asked, as a courtesy to the other people, don't ask it again. Just kindly get off the line and sit down.
We're going to have a soft 2-minute clock here. You'll see the clock. I think they can see it? Yes? I don't know. I can't see it. And so you can reserve it for your question, or one question, and then you can get back on the line if you have another, or you can make a comment. Okay.
Is it 2 minutes per question or is it 2 minutes total for everything?
2 minutes total for everything. Okay? All right. So are we ready here at the dais? Okay.
Lean and mean.
And will you please say your name too? Lean and mean. Mic number 1, please.
Hello, my name is Kai Jordan. I'm a working voice actor, and so I just want to say before I ask, everybody, thank you for your efforts. It's honestly appreciated. That said, I honestly do not feel comfortable as a dubbing voice actor with this current thing. If it goes through, I'm horrified for my future and everyone else's future, and I cannot. I've already voted. I've already made my decision. I'm voting no, and I wanted to ask. A friend of mine wanted to ask. I have read that SAG-AFTRA's membership has never failed to ratify a contract before. What if we send it back? That's what I want to ask.
Thank you.
Sure. So yeah, thank you for starting with the hard question. I appreciate it. That's okay. What happens if this contract isn't ratified? So, I mean, let's be real about it, because what happens if this contract isn't ratified is we have to go back to the negotiating committee and the national board and decide what to do next. So it seems obvious that if this contract is not ratified, we're not just going to go back into negotiations, because why would we think that if this contract is rejected that all of a sudden the companies are just going to offer more or do something that you would view as better? So that really leaves us with only really one path, which would be to attempt to restart a strike and go back on strike against these companies for an indeterminate period of time until something happened that made us think we could reach an agreement that the members would ratify. That would either mean that the strike lasted so long that members changed their mind and decided to ratify it anyway, or it would mean that the companies would decide to offer something that they haven't already offered. From every indication I have, and there are negotiating committee members and others here who may have different views or whatever, but we have no indications from these companies that they would be willing to offer more than this. We went on strike for 118 days to get this. We extracted last-minute concessions from them based on the timing of this. When, in my view, we went to the moment of peak leverage, the moment when they were forced to make decisions about canceling shows and canceling projects for next year, and that's how we extracted the final concessions in generative AI and others, and on the streaming bonus money as well. So I think just being really realistic, if this contract is voted down, then you should expect that we will need to go back on strike, and we'll need to go back on strike for a significant period of time before we will figure out if we are able to achieve something different that members would be happier with. And I guess I would just wrap up that answer by saying, collective bargaining it's a negotiation. And even when you go on strike, going on strike, it's not a genie, it doesn't give you wishes. Going on strike adds leverage to your toolbox, and that's what you then use to get where you wanted to go. We couldn't get anywhere near this by July 12th. That's why we went on strike. We used that leverage to get the deal that we've just talked to you about. And so just recognize that a non-ratification of this deal doesn't mean we're going to get something better. And in my experience, it results in the opposite of that, which is the companies getting entrenched against us, feeling like they offered this and then we rejected it, and we probably have to go back and have a real fight just to keep up with where we are now. So just be aware that that is a real risk of not ratifying this deal. The last thing I just want to say about it is, remember that there are no restrictions on AI right now in this contract. So one of the things that companies do when you reach an impasse, they didn't do it in this case, and traditionally they haven't done it in this industry, but in the event of a non-ratification, they certainly could do this, which is bargain to impasse and then implement unilaterally their last, best, and final offer. That last, best, and final offer could have much less or even no regulations on AI in it. So as much as I understand people being really scared about what could happen with AI in this industry, my question to you would be, do you really feel you'd be better off with no AI regulation at all than what we've just talked about in terms of the AI regulation we've negotiated? Because that is a very real possibility of a non-ratification of this deal.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, order, please. Okay. Thank you. Mic 2, please.
Hello, 1, 2, hello.
Yes.
Hi, I know a lot of you, you know a lot of me. My name is Christian Telesmar. I am a newly elected LA local board member. Yes. And I'm here with the wonderful Jeff Torres,
Hi, Jeff Torres. Nice. Hi, how you guys doing?
strike captain extraordinaire. We have a very similar question, so we're just going to join together, right? Why not? I do want to preface, he wrote it very well, so I'm going to have him ask the question, but I do want to preface the importance of withholding our labor during a strike. That's the strongest leverage we have. It's very important, and AI, the way it's written right now, is leading me to think we might lose that leverage. So I'm going to have Jeff ask the question specifically.
Okay, so you guys have said repeatedly that lack of consent for a digital replica usage can be used as a condition of employment, right? So you guys have said that. So likely that detailed consent will be given before we shoot or get contracted. Like you guys said, e.g. for insurance purposes. It's really dark, right? With that consent, if the studio's producers abide by that consent they received from you, they shoot the script as is, nothing changes that requires additional consent, can they use our digital replicas, principal or background, employment-based or independently created, to finish projects, whether a film or a TV episode, specifically like Marvel or a big-budget production, while we are on strike, or a synthetic performer while we are on strike? Can they do that?
So it's a great question. The answer, first of all, let me just say, you may remember that after we went on strike, there was content that had been created prior to the strike for the explicit purpose of being used after we went on strike, for example, for EPKs and promotional materials for theatrical movies, et cetera, et cetera. So could they do something similar to that or finish out projects with digital replicas if they had achieved sufficient, specific, informed consent? Yes, they could do that. But let me finish. I see your expression. I hear you. But they have to have the specific, detailed, informed consent. So if you're talking about like a television series, for example, right? It is unlikely they're going to be able to finish out a series with sufficiently detailed, informed consent from things that they got for episode 1 to continue on through multiple episodes. So could they finish out an episode or maybe 2? It's a possibility. Could they finish out a series? I think it's very unlikely they'd be able to have sufficient detailed consent to do that. And so that's why the consent provisions are so crucial and so important. And of course, once the strike began, members would not be granting any further consent. They wouldn't grant any consent for promotional work. They wouldn't grant any consent for anything. And so that would rapidly come to a close.
You guys turn my mic back. But like if they got it before the strike, that's the importance of it. They got the consent before the strike, then we cannot withhold our labor.
So let me ask you, well, I guess I shouldn't ask you a question, but let me pose a hypothetical question to you. So, in 2008, the writers went on strike. In 2023, the writers went on strike. Studios knew the writers might go on strike. Studios got some episodes of a series written by writers, and then they shot some of those episodes of series after the writers' strike began, before our strike started, right? But in 2008 and again in 2023, the writers' strike had a significant and immediate impact on shutting down the industry, even though there were scripts that had already been written and there were projects that those writers had worked on in advance of that strike. So I think that it's important to recognize what you're saying is a legitimate concern, but it's also important not to make it a larger concern than it really is. And I think just along the lines of the writers' strike, a SAG-AFTRA strike in an environment where reasonably specific, detailed, informed consent is required is not going to be deterred for any significant period of time.
I have 18 seconds. I'll take the 18 seconds. What about promotional material, right? They could still use AI to finish promotional material, maybe even have our AIs represent us at conventions while we are on the picket line in our voice, in our likeness. Do you see any limitations there? Because that can be approved and given the consent prior to a strike, and then we are now losing that leverage. Because I think we all have seen how much our withholding our labor has impacted their box office, impacted the ability for them to promote their projects. It's a huge leverage, and I don't know, maybe you could tell me they have to write the script for the promotion before we can consent to it? I don't know. It doesn't say that in the contract. I don't know. It just says specify. It says reasonably specify, and I think that reasonably specify is very vague. And I don't know if it's not specific enough, you know? So it's hard to trust that we have enough protection now. And just like streaming, streaming, the first way we enter that into the contract, it sets the tone. And if we don't set the tone with this first negotiation, we'll be behind the wave, trying to fight to get back in front of it. And I just want to make that a consideration for everybody here.
Okay, thank you so much.
And I appreciate what you said, Christian, but I guess a couple of things I would just want to point out. Number one, the fact is, promotional work was done prior to this strike. EPKs were shot, promotional videos were shot. That stuff tapped out within a matter of days or weeks after that, and it didn't cause a diminution in the power of our strike. And in fact, so many theatrical exhibitions were postponed because of that, even though months before they knew they could have shot that stuff. So I think we gotta be reasonable about how we approach that. And as far as reasonably specific goes, our lawyers have said that they think that reasonably specific is a term of art. It's a legal term that has an enforceable definition, and it's something that we feel confident that we can enforce in the event that something like that happens. So I understand what you're saying completely, but I just want to remind everybody, this is a negotiation. This is not, we don't get to go out and just dictate what ends up in this contract. A strike gives us a lot of leverage. It doesn't give us the power to just say everything we want is going to happen. And we negotiated hard over each and every provision in the AI section. So don't think that we could have just said, oh, well, we would have liked language that would have been better than that. That language was hard fought over. Reasonably specific was hard fought over. They didn't want that. They felt that was far too limiting. So just be aware that that's the reality of this language, and our lawyers feel very confident that we can enforce it if push comes to shove.
Okay, thank you. The woman at mic 1, please. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Vivia Armstrong. Thank you all for everything. Question regarding the streaming longevity 8 to 10 year mark that you mentioned. Is that regarding the show being specifically on one platform, or is that regarding the show itself, period? Because some shows jump from one platform to the next, and they don't stay on it possibly for 8 to 10 years, although that is still being discovered as far as how long they may stay on them. I'm noticing a lot of platforms may just keep it for a couple of months to maybe a year or two. So I'm asking, is that going to apply to the show itself or only to an individual platform? And question regarding the casting sites, does that mean that they can no longer, sites like casting networks or Actors Access can no longer charge per submission? Or how does that apply to this new casting requirement and payments?
Sure. So to respond to your first question, the increases for the percentages for exhibition years 8 through 11 will apply for the continued exhibition of that program on that platform. If the program moves to another platform, a different residual kicks in. So for example, if it moves from one streaming platform to another streaming platform, they will have to pay 3.6% of that license fee, whatever they get for that, to the cast. So the increases to those exhibition years apply under the formula that governs what you pay for continued exhibition on that platform, but there are other residuals that kick in if it moves to another platform. With respect to the casting sites, the long and short of it is, yes, they will have to provide you with a mechanism for submitting yourself and obtaining the audition materials that you don't have to pay for.
So I may no longer have to pay for like a casting networks or something like that. And then with that, does it end up being more beneficial for it to stay on one platform or for it to jump from platform to platform?
I think it's very difficult to say because you don't know what license fee gets negotiated when it gets jumped to another platform. It will vary whether the fixed residual that you get for continued exhibition would be better or whether you're better off. It's going to depend on the license fee that they negotiate to that next platform. And just to point out, I mean, it doesn't have to be exclusively one or the other. So if it's a non-exclusive license, for example, it could stay on the first platform. You can continue to collect that residual, and in addition to that, you would get an additional residual if it also appeared on a second platform.
Okay, so I do request that over time you all monitor how that works so you can, in future negotiations, be able to have it for the best deal, especially if they're jumping platforms, which seems to be pretty common. Thank you all so much.
Thanks. And can I just ask, I just would ask everybody also to, after the effective date of this provision, to let us know if you find that there are casting platforms that are attempting to charge fees for submissions, for access to sides, any of that stuff for SAG-AFTRA covered projects, because after approximately the 10th of December, that should no longer be happening, assuming this contract is ratified, and we would want you to let us know so that we can take action in the event that anybody is continuing to do that. And I should note, that doesn't mean they have to get rid of subscriptions. It means they can't make you sign up for a subscription to get access to sides, to submit a self-tape, and they can't give any preferential treatment for someone who does sign up for a subscription. So if you find out any of those things are happening, we want to know about it.
Okay, great. Mike 2, hello.
Hi, I'm Jillian Clare, also a newly elected LA local board member and the co-chair of the LA Young Performers Committee. My question is based on concerns I've read specifically from that community. Will there be any additional protections for minors regarding AI and the MOA, i.e., is there a certain amount of time a company can keep a minor's digital replica after the project or franchise has finished? Any special consideration for how it is stored? And if companies are allowed to keep the replicas past the project's completion, what happens to their digital replica when they turn 18? Additionally, was there an advisor who works in minors' rights and child protection that was brought on to advise on minors in AI?
So thanks for those questions. So first of all, let's just note that for minors in general, there is a legal framework that allows minors to disavow contracts when they turn 18. So with respect to things like the ability to make use of consent that was granted, let's say by a parent or guardian while a minor is under 18, that ability to use that can be disavowed by the minor when they turn 18 unless the company, with the cooperation of the parent or guardian, goes and gets court confirmation of those commitments made while the minor is under 18. So there will be an ability, setting aside situations where a court has independently approved those consents or those contract terms, there will be an ability for minors to disavow those contract provisions, including consents that have been granted upon reaching the age of majority. I will just flag, for young performers, there's a certain window period to do that. You need to investigate that to make sure that you are following all the procedural requirements depending on what state you live in, because that's a matter of state law. So there's no special provisions in this contract as it relates to AI and young performers regarding retention of digital replicas. There is not a provision that limits the companies in terms of how long they can retain a digital replica, but there, of course, are all of the provisions that require them to obtain informed consent before making any use of a digital replica that they have retained. As far as whether there was any specific, there was not any specific young performer AI consultant for this negotiation. Obviously, we consulted with several various people regarding AI provisions, both people within our committee and people outside of the negotiating committee, including outside experts. But I don't think there was anyone who was designated as specifically focused on young performer issues as they relate to AI in this negotiation. And the only other thing I would just mention as far as young performers is, obviously there are certain provisions that are specific to young performers outside of the AI section that may relate, such as for example, the extended time available for young performers to complete self-tapes or work hour limitations and things like that, all of which apply as appropriate to a digital replica environment.
Thanks. I would
Thanks.
just ask that during the next negotiations, we do have somebody in there who is voicing the concerns for AI with young performers. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jillian. Cheryl, hello.
Oh, yes. Hi, I'm Cheryl Bricker, SAG number 1072910. I know that now from picketing a lot. So,
Get closer to the mic,
yes,
Cheryl.
I will do that for you. I'm very thank you, as everyone has said, for your many hours of hard work. I am very heartened to hear that you're going to provide us with, I would at least like the privilege of reading the document that the board read that has been sent on it, instead of the Bill Barr issue that we've got now. So, because part of what my problem with this is that I know I heard you say about legal language, but I'm disturbed by the use of the words like generally and reasonably specific and good faith effort. I don't know what that is, and I've heard nothing about how those are enforced and by whom. Much like I don't really understand when you're saying you're de-incentivizing by making it too expensive AI for vocal or image or whatever. You want to make it too expensive so they want to use actors. Haven't heard anything about how that's enforced. My big, I have many concerns, but the one concern is about streaming, that you're talking about this success being in 90 days when it launches, a new show launches. What makes you think that a streaming service won't bury that and on day 91 it becomes a success? I mean, again, I don't know how, if I figured this out, they're way ahead of it. So what about the enforcement of this? Who's enforcing? How are you enforcing it? What are the deets?
Thank you. Duncan?
Yes. So first of all, just to clear up something, the board hasn't read the MOA. No one has read it because it's not complete. So the board reviewed the exact summary that you have that has been published, the 18-page summary. That's what the board also reviewed in terms of reviewing this agreement. So I just want to be clear about that. There's not a completed MOA that's being held back from anybody. The MOA is being worked on as we speak with the goal of getting it published to you as soon as possible. And again, I want to just remind everybody, that is how every contract ratification in this union has been done, certainly in the 23 years that I've worked here and long before that from what I've been told. So I just want you to know that there's not something different being done this time other than us like working really hard to get the MOA done so we can publish it so that you can all see it. So, and we will do that as soon as possible. As far as the concerns about the terms like reasonably specific and good faith efforts, I mean, just so you know, when you see the MOA, those words will still be there because those are the actual words that are the defining legal standard. I mean, good faith efforts and reasonably specific are terms of art and law that have legal definitions that have been established through case law and other mechanisms. So, you will still see those terms in the MOA when it comes up. And sure. So, well, maybe I'll have our lawyers answer that question, but reasonably specific, I mean, we have some bargaining history on that point that talks about what kinds of things are elements of being reasonably specific, but a standard for reasonable specificity has to do with what a reasonable person would consider adequately specific as to the information that's needed to evaluate whether they wish to grant their consent. And so that is an objective standard. That's not a standard based on the person in question. It's not like what do you personally consider to be what you want to know. It has an objective standard to it. What would a reasonable person in your same circumstances expect to know in order to make an informed decision about whether you wish to grant your consent or not. That's what that means. And back to your points. As to enforcement, absolutely. Enforcement is going to be a huge part, like it is in many things in our contract. That's why we have a team that's specifically devoted to contract enforcement, both in our contracts department and in our legal department. And I certainly expect we will have to ramp up some resources to help enforce the new provisions in this contract, because there are a lot of them, as we just went through. As far as the streaming bonus goes, the question of whether a streaming service would bury their projects for 90 days in an attempt to somehow evade paying the streaming bonus, I mean, we have good data on how many projects have qualified for this in prior years. based on this standard. And so if we determine that that is happening, then we will absolutely grieve and arbitrate against that. Because we can see from looking at the patterns for 2022, for example, how projects were placed on the platform and how many projects qualified or didn't qualify under that standard. It's also the same standard, by the way, that the Writers Guild is using in their contract, so I would expect that we'll be able to collaborate on enforcement, just like we do in our Tri-Guild audit program, where we audit residuals provisions using outside third-party auditors. So all of those resources will be available to help make sure that there's no shenanigans going on the part of the streaming platforms, and we definitely will be watching.
Thank you. Duncan, can I just ask you about approximately how long is the MOA, would it be, in terms of pages?
I think the final version will be probably approximately 130 pages.
Okay, so there you go. Mike 2, please.
Hi, my name is Joel Michaely. How are you all?
Hi.
Thanks for all your hard work. I'm a little concerned with, this is something I brought up with David Jolliffe in some of the working and wages meetings and stuff. On the streaming residuals for a big movie on a streaming platform, let's say you get, a $200 million Ryan Reynolds movie, they were capping the residuals at like $4,000, which like if that was theatrical would be like hundreds of thousands of dollars in residuals. So I don't know, has that gone up on this contract? I don't know if that's gone up. Has syndication rights come back? Fran made a lot of money in syndication and ownership on the show and stuff. Like, did syndication come back in this contract? I've heard nothing in regards to it. Like, what's happening with the pension increases? You say health and stuff, but, as I've heard before that, people have voted against giving us higher pension increases and giving more to staff. Like what is happening with some of this stuff? And also like cable was considered like a new media kind of thing, and it hasn't gone up in residuals for like 40 years, like HBO and stuff. You do an episode of an HBO show, you make $1 in residuals. So it's like I haven't heard any of these like certain different issues being expressed in here. Sorry, spitting out a lot in one round.
That is a lot. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm
That
going to
was
try
your
to take
2
some of them.
minutes.
I think Ray will probably pick up some of these, and we may ask for some other people. So let me just start with the thing about pension increases, because I think that was directed at the caps piece that I mentioned and the increases there. Those increases were not just for the health plan. Those increases were for the pension plan and the retirement fund as well. So those caps increases govern the limitations on contributions that are made to all three of those plans in each of those areas. So the same percentage increase that we were talking about, 67% in one and 43% in the other, applies equally to the contributions that are being made to the SAG Producers Pension Plan and to the After Retirement Fund, depending on which fund the contributions from that project are going to. So is that not what you were asking about? It looks like on your face like that was not what you were questioning.
I do want to know like what more was being added to the pension, because like for example, my pension, I've been working as an actor primarily in film for over 25 years, over 100 movies, something, and my pension is super low. It's like $400 when I retire, like a month. It's a joke. Whereas, so I know our pension rate accruing is very low, whereas I know like you in particular, Duncan, has voted for a higher rate for the staff before as opposed to, and a lower rate for us. So it's a little disconcerting, so I want to know like what kind of levels are we getting now on this contract?
Sure, so I just want to be clear, like the pension benefit questions are not part of this contract. So, I mean, I'm happy to talk about them. I'm not sure if now is the right time. We are adding, as I think I said, about $180 million over the terms of this contract into the benefit plans as a result of those increased contributions. What will be done with that in terms of SAG producers pension or the after retirement pensions is going to be determined by those boards of trustees. But really, from my point of view, what I would say is adding additional contributions and increasing those caps can have a direct benefit to you, because if you're working in episodic television, for example, you will now get more pension credit for every project you work on if you're earning above those caps. If you're earning below those caps, it won't change anything. But if you earned between those two numbers, you will now get credit for more money for every episode that you've worked on. And that's something that can benefit you both from a health eligibility point of view and also from a pension benefit point of view. And I think probably the other issues we can talk about outside of a contract referendum scenario, but absolutely they're legitimate questions.
What's
we should
going
talk
on now
about.
with the streaming residuals? Are they still capped at like $4,000?
I'm so sorry. Well, I think Ray, maybe you can answer. You said, and I believe you said that there was some kind of $4,000 cap on the residuals from a feature moved to a streaming platform, which I'm not familiar with. So Ray, maybe you can speak to that.
I don't think there is a $4,000 cap. There is an imputation process that has to be gone through to figure out what those residuals are going to be, because it's going to be a distributor's gross receipts based formula that applies to a feature that moves to a streaming platform. So, if it's a third-party produced feature, it's just a percentage of the license fee that they get from the streaming platform. If it's produced by the platform for the platform, then they have to make a good faith judgment about what that's worth and what that quote-unquote imputed license fee is going to be, but the residual formula would apply.
And what's up with cable and syndication?
Okay, I just have to say, you had like
Thank you,
3
Jody.
questions, so.
There's nothing has changed with respect to the formula for
He is gonna answer.
the reuse of cable programs on a cable network, nor has the syndication formula changed.
Okay. Mic number 1.
Hey, how's it going? My name is Joseph Jones, actor. My question, I guess, in 2022, Capitol Records signed a AI rapper, and they were met with so much backlash from other artists, from consumers, from everyone who listened to music, that 10 days later they had to drop this artist. Now, I know, you've mentioned before about disincentivizing the studios and receiving notifications whenever we were replaced with synthetic AI. Like, what notifications will we then receive as artists or members of SAG-AFTRA to rally behind and boycott whenever they try to replace a performer or get rid of us?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really excellent point. I don't think there's anything in this contract that would limit us in sharing that information with our members and with the world. I will note, we have, in fact, I during this negotiation, I testified with the Federal Trade Commission about our support for labeling of AI content so that consumers can know when there is AI or fake content being created. And we continue to support that as well as our other legislative efforts in this area. So I think it's a great point, and absolutely we could use our members and the general public to put pressure on the companies about AI fakes.
Okay, thank you. And people get it, and they want to support actors. They want to keep us working. So thank you for the work and the effort that you guys have done on the front lines of this to get us a good deal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone number 2, please.
Hello, my name is Elle Latham. I'm extrapolating on that a little bit with the AI conversation and wanted to ask, will you fight to keep human actors employed in the next contract negotiation? What happens when the AI outperforms human actors? And have you thought of all the scenarios that could and likely will occur as a result of the AI provisions in this very contract? How likely will it be that the digital replica condition of employment will further normalize digital replication and that more human actors will miss out on jobs because of lack of consent to this new technology? How can you ensure that human actors and background actors will be able to get work in this brave new world generated by AI? Thank you.
I think there's a lot there, and I really appreciate the passion that's obviously in what you're saying. And I think a lot of people up here agree with you. I mean, our goal is to protect human actors. And, we have different ways of doing that for different types of acting. I mean, obviously, we talked about background where we were able, because our contract structure is different for background actors, we were able to protect those covered jobs as human jobs. Obviously, the employment-based digital replica, which is what we expect to be the most frequently used of any of the provisions in this AI piece of the contract is based on the concept that there is primarily a human actor working there. That's how the digital replica is created, and the idea is that the digital replica is used in combination with the human actor. The kinds of things the companies have talked about doing is facilitating certain reshoots where there's scheduling problems, things of that nature. I know that it is in everyone's mind the idea that actors would just be gone and that only digital replicas or synthetic fakes would be used in place of actors. But I happen to believe that your sort of starting premise, what happens when AI outperforms human actors, I happen to believe that that's not going to happen. And the reason why I believe that's not going to happen is not because robots can't be programmed to perform certain actions better than us, but because I believe that acting, just like writing, for example, is a fundamentally human creative activity, and that there is not an AI that can do what Meryl Streep can do. And I don't know your acting personally, but I'm sure there is not an AI that can do what you can do. And so while it is true that AIs can be created to do certain types of things, it is all of our objective to preserve human artistry, human creativity, and that is precisely what we're going to do. And one other thing I'll just say, I see you want to continue, and that's fine, but the one thing I want to say is, one of the things that we've done to help protect that is we have strongly advocated and supported our Copyright Office's decision that AI creations are not eligible for copyright registration. That's one of the things that's going to help us protect against having wholesale replacement of humans with AI creation, because one thing these companies know is their earnings and existence is entirely based on copyright. Their earnings and existence is based on their ability to make money off of these projects, and they are going to have a real problem doing that if they try to shift into AI. So we can't look at it as only this contract. It is a broader picture, and I assure you we're fighting on all of those fronts.
I am seeing it as a broader picture. That's why I brought up the broad questions that I brought up. But I also wanted to mention that I wouldn't say that I don't believe that you would protect us as human actors. I believe that the companies would not have an incentive to do so, and that is the problem.
It is a problem, but that's why these provisions are so important. If we don't have these provisions, we have a blank page. And let me tell you, as a lawyer whose most of my entire career, other than when I was a criminal prosecutor for a couple of years, since then, my entire career has been devoted to protecting actors, performers, and our other members. And let me tell you, I would much rather have 16 pages of detailed protections to use to fight for you than a blank page and a statement that we hate AI. Because one of those things I can do something with, and the other one, I can't.
It's not really about hating AI. It's about controlling AI.
I was being a little dramatic there, I admit. Sorry.
Yeah, but like,
I apologize.
The issue is the companies will exert their control over us in many ways, and they will use AI to do that, and that's what I'm concerned about.
That's what we're all trying to fight against. And I respect that people may have a different view than I do about how to do that, but I just hope we all know that's what everyone in this room, I am 100% convinced, we are all fighting for the same result, which is protecting actors. And, if we have any disagreements about how to do it, that's fine, but just know we're all on the same team in that fight.
Also, on a personal note, I will not vote until I read the entire contract. Thank you very much for your time.
We'll get it to you as soon as we can, I promise.
Thank you. All right, the gentleman at mic 1, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Nicolason, and so nice to see everybody in the flesh here tonight. So my questions are also related to AI, but more about the oversight and the security measures in place. Duncan just went on about all the provisions and protections, and I just want to pin down on that because this is going to become a condition of employment. So I just want to make sure that we are okay adhering to these conditions and we're protected. So the questions. It's a multi-layered question all on this subject. In this age of deepfakes, hacking, and identity theft, how will SAG-AFTRA ensure that members' unique biometric data is safely collected, stored, transmitted, compensated, and properly disposed of? These are things like our retinal imagery, our voice samples, fingerprints, high-resolution body mapping. And note that our bargaining partners, Disney, Sony Pictures, and Sony Interactive, are already on the California government's official list of data breaches. Which SAG-AFTRA department specifically, or outside services, will be overseeing these privacy protections of our members, and what is the contracted term of this oversight? After all, in a short time, we're going to have hundreds of thousands of LLCs, active and defunct, possessing our biometric data. And I just want to make sure we have these protections that Duncan said is tomes and tomes and pages, and he's devoted his life to it. I just want to make sure they are in this contract. I want to hear all about them. If the unfinished project is sold to a non-contracted third party, can our private biometric data also be sold to a non-contracted third party? Will SAG-AFTRA have oversight measures in place to track that data in these cases? Can this data be stored overseas in foreign countries? If so, what stopgaps and legal recourses does our union have in these other global jurisdictions? I want to hear about the protections put in place. And lastly, considering there's a market for everything, how can our non-identifiable scan data, synthesized or hybrid, can it be sold to outside industries? What sort of oversight, constraints, or disclosures are in place to make sure that this non-identifiable data is actually non-identifiable, or that we have knowledge and consent of the sale of our private, unique biometric data? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's start with the question of what the companies have the right to do with the data that they create through a scan for the creation of a digital replica. And the answer is the only thing they have the right to do with that is to use that digital replica in the project for which you were engaged. The contract specifically prohibits them from doing anything else with that digital replica without your informed consent to such a use. So if the companies want to sell it to a third party, if the companies want to use it for something else, none of that can be done without coming to you first, explaining to you precisely with reasonable specificity what it is that they intend to do, and getting your consent, which you can decline, or you can condition on payment, or you can grant as you see fit. So that's what their rights are to do with it. In terms of how will we ensure that the data is safely collected, et cetera, these companies are obligated to make sure that no use other than the use that is authorized as part of the digital replica creation and use is permitted. So these companies are required to use industry standard measures to protect that information to ensure that that doesn't happen. And if it does happen, then we will have remedies for that through grievance and arbitration, just like any other violation of this contract. In terms of the question of what department will be overseeing the compliance with this, our contracts department and our legal department will be overseeing compliance with these provisions, just like every other provision that we have in the contract. The question is regarding data breaches. It is a reality of life that there are data breaches. So if you're asking, can I guarantee that no studio is ever going to have a data breach? The answer is no, I cannot guarantee that. No one could guarantee that. And if someone said they could guarantee that, you should distrust that answer. But it is a fact that these companies will have legal liability in the event that they don't use security measures to ensure that no unauthorized use of a digital replica is made. Can the data be stored overseas in other countries? Yes, the data could be stored overseas in other countries, provided that the same security measures are in place. And by the way, for any of you who use any cloud service, the data can be stored overseas as well. So security measures are the key factor, more so than the question of the geographic location of the server. And finally, how is non-identifiable data protected? Whether the data is identifiable or non-identifiable, if it was created for the purpose of creating a digital replica of you, it can't be used except with your informed consent. And so the companies cannot sell it, they cannot de-identify it and sell it. That data is subject to the terms of this contract, and we'll enforce those terms.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much. Mic 2, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney Olson, and I'm a stunt performer. And I speak for all stunt performers when we feel like we've been left out of the conversation, because I'm not seeing any literature on what stunt performers are protected against with AI. So if you could please enlighten me on that.
Sure, no, I really appreciate the question. And number one, stunt performers have the same exact protections applying to them as any other performer under this contract, the rules for digital replication. And I think if I were a stunt performer, a part that I would consider particularly important would be the generative AI rules as it relates to the creation of synthetic performers, because obviously for some stunt performers, they may be recognizable in roles, but many stunt performers may not be individually recognizable in roles. And so for synthetic performances, my response to you is really very similar to what I had to say about loopers, which is if there is a creation of a synthetic fake or synthetic performer for purposes of doing a stunt, the companies have to notify us of that, so we'll have notice of it. And on top of that, we have the ability to negotiate for compensation or consideration for that, and our intention would be to use that negotiation power to make that something that is not economically advantageous for the companies, so that they will not have an incentive to replace live stunt performers with a synthetic performer instead. And so that is what we'll do with the information, and perhaps I should add to my list what your fellow member earlier said about also using that notification to help bring it to the attention of the membership and perhaps the broader community at large, so that they can express their disapproval of projects that are replacing people with synthetic fakes if that comes to pass. Everything that we've been told by the companies and our experience of what the companies are doing to date suggests that that is less likely to occur during the term of this contract. What's more likely to occur during the term of this contract is the use of digital replicas as it relates to principal performers who are unavailable for various reasons. But that doesn't mean we didn't pay attention to it. We did pay attention to it. And in fact, we will continue to stay focused on how to make sure stunt performers, just like all of our other categories of performers, are not left out in the cold as a result of the use of AI. And I really appreciate you asking the questions. Thank you.
I just have one more concern. Is it possible for them to then make a replica of the actor and just have that do the stunts?
So, I mean, that is a legitimate concern. And if there is a stunt that can be convincingly done by a digital replica of a principal performer, then that's a problem. I mean, and it's the same problem, frankly, that we have with certain other areas like voice matching, for example. It doesn't mean that that's going to happen routinely. It doesn't mean that that's going to be a go-to. And I think there will be a number of circumstances where it's non-feasible from a technical point of view, or it's more expensive from a technical point of view. But it is a concern, and it's something we're going to have to monitor very closely. And if we detect a pattern of that happening, then we're going to have to negotiate in the next round of bargaining for additional protections that are specific to that particular concern. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to mic number 1, please.
Hi, my name is Veronica Bruce. I wanted to thank you so much for opening up this AI dialogue. And my question goes to actually what you keep on saying about synthetic performers in the Gen AI section, talking about being able to bargain for them to de-incentivize. Could you please go more specifically into what that means? Is that a penalty fee? What exactly are you okay to bargain?
Well, first of all, let me just say that determination would be made by the standing committee for this contract, which is the negotiating committee that you see up here. Some of the members aren't here. So that's, how we would strategize the demand for that is something that would depend upon the circumstances. But in general terms, it would be to make sure that the cost of doing that, our estimate of what it would have cost for them to engage an actual performer to do that work is the floor for that bargaining. I wouldn't call it a penalty fee for various legal reasons, but what I would call it is us negotiating, which we have every right to do under the provisions of this contract, for an economic terms that we think are appropriate for the use of a synthetic performer. And from my point of view, the economic terms that would be appropriate for that use are terms that are at least equal to or preferably greater than what the cost of that would have been to use a human performer to do the same work.
My concern around this is that AI is already populating scenes. I mean, crowds are being populated with synthetic performers. So how are you going to distinguish, oh, that's Gen AI, oh, that was a model, oh, that was from a licensing from a software program? And then how exactly are you, again, I feel like it's so obscure. It's like,
how are you going to, if you're going to take that money, if you're going to bargain some level, how then are you going to distribute that? Who's going to decide? How much of a side letter is this?
So as far as crowd scenes goes, I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, when we talk about crowd scenes, I want to just remind everybody that the proposed contract includes a guarantee of employment of actual human background actors up to the coverage maximums in our contract. So if there are crowd scenes where they're going to use any kind of AI replication for numbers above that, that's outside the jurisdiction of our contract, number one. Number two, all of the SAG-AFTRA covered background will be engaged. And if they use digital replicas of those or other SAG-AFTRA background in order to fill out those crowd scenes, they will have to be paid. So, you know, a very plausible, possible way that that could be done is by actually engaging more covered background actors. The covered background actors in person, plus covered digital replicas for whom they are getting paid and getting benefit plan contributions, even though they don't have to report to work physically that day. Having said that, it is a guarantee in the contract that up to those coverage numbers, background actors have to be engaged. So for purposes of crowd scenes, we're not going to see a diminution of the number of days of work for background actors. As a matter of fact, we're going to see a vast increase in that because, as I'm sure you know, the current number for theatrical motion pictures, for example, is 57 covered positions in the West Coast zone. And now that number is going to go up to, is it 80 or 85? I can't remember. 85. So that means on any project where you're going to be hiring a large number of background actors, you now have a huge number of additional covered positions, and all of those have to be filled with humans, not with AI tools. So I just wanted to be clear for crowd scenes, I don't think that's an area. I mean, there are plenty of areas for concern in AI. I acknowledge that. I don't think crowd scenes is one of them for those reasons. And now that I went into that whole rant about crowd scenes, Veronica, I'm so sorry, I forgot the second half of what you said.
That is exactly, though, those are synthetic performers, and you're talking about synthetic performers that you're going to bargain for. I'm not concerned with the 80 coverage. I'm still asking, how is that being, what does that mean being bargained? Because it's like these synthetic performers do not reflect to be a member of the union. They were not created by the union. How are you bargaining for something that you don't represent as a bargaining representative?
Because we're not really bargaining, we're not bargaining to get the synthetic performer paid. We're bargaining to make sure that there's not an incentive to use them in the first place. That's what we're really bargaining for. That's why this provision is so important, and frankly, why I'm so pleased that we got it, because the companies could have said, this is a non-mandatory subject to bargaining. We don't have to negotiate over this. There's no actual employment going on here. Instead, we were able to use the leverage generated by our strike and by all of you being out on picket lines to actually get them to give us something in generative AI that we did not have a legal right to force through, right? And so having that ability to negotiate and be notified of those uses is entirely designed to help us constrain how much use of synthetic fakes can happen in this contract. And I just urge you to really think, not you personally, but all of us, to think a lot about this issue, because if we didn't have that provision, then I ask you, what constrains them? If we didn't have that provision, what constrains them? Nothing constrains them. This is a really important tool for us to use to help make sure that human actors remain in this picture and that we don't have a takeover by synthetic fakes.
I guess I'm not really sold, because I just don't hear how that's really happening. If I don't hear that. I don't hear enforcing that. I don't know, but we'll have to wait and see. My next question is also about AI. And it's about the deceased performers, and I've heard you say two different. I've heard you say two different things. On Monday, it sounded like it was an opt-out situation, like, hey, if you don't want the union to be deciding for things for you when you're deceased, then you just let us know. And then I heard you on the Instagram Live saying that, well, of course, you know, the producer said they needed this because they didn't know where to go, as if they don't know to go to the estate. And then you said it was kind of an opt-in situation. So which one is it? And is it really necessary to keep that kind of union consent aspect on there, because it's already kind of law? So I was just curious about how exactly that's going to work.
Thank you.
Sure. So I don't think that I said two different things. If it came across that way, I apologize. But it's neither an opt-in nor an opt-out. It is built into the contract. The way you can opt out of it is by having a will, having heirs, having beneficiaries, and making sure that they keep the union informed in the event of your untimely demise as to who they are and where they are, so that there will never be a need for union consent to be an issue. The other thing that I mentioned was we do plan on establishing a system so that performers can inform us of their desires with respect to any kind of consent for use after their death, just in case they end up dying without a will or they end up dying without any heirs or whatever, so that we have that guidance. The companies really negotiated for this to be included, and as part of the overall package of what we achieved in AI, we had to make some compromises and adjustments, and so this is one of them. But from my point of view, it still leaves all the control in the hands of the performer. If you want your heirs and beneficiaries to decide this for you, then you can make that happen. If you want to specify it before your death, you can make that happen. If you don't even want to think about it because it's a scary thought and you just want to leave it to whatever happens, you can do that. It's really up to you. You have all that control, and we will put out guidance or information to members about how they can give us their instructions if they choose to do that.
Okay, great, thank you. Karen, at mic 2. Her mic's not on, please. There she goes,
Okay.
yeah.
Hi, I'm Karen West. I've been, wow, it's loud. I've been a member of SAG since 1979. I love you guys. I admire you. I know you've gotten a hell of a good things for us. I feel, as I told Francis earlier, I'm at that holiday party where everything's going well, but then the drunk cousin shows up, and it's the ugly issue we're focusing on, not the fun at the party. I still have that champagne in the fridge, but I can't celebrate yet because I'm really, really concerned. Our union protects us that when we say no, we don't get retaliated against. Unions fail when they say, we don't need you, we can replace you. They did that a little bit with the SAG commercial strike. We'll just get non-union. So I'm worried about a replica of myself. I'm worried that because this is, for me, an existential moment for all of AI. You know it, I know it. And the intrusion of AI in our labor market. I don't understand if the Writers Guild refused to let AI write any scripts. Why, and I'm confounded where we're letting our bodies, literally, and our body of work to be free to replicate in perpetuity. It's the same fight, and Writers Guild won it. I have confidence in you. I know you can do better. You're the best negotiating team ever. I know you can do better. So, what is the mechanism if a union, what's the mechanism if they want my consent?
Whoops.
Whoop, can you hear me?
Yes, that was your time.
Oh.
Finish. No.
Go on. Go on, Karen. Continue.
Go for it.
Thank you. What is the mechanism if I don't give consent, so they don't hire me, retaliation? Who is going to sue them for discrimination? I don't have the money, I'm a working class actor. Who is going to sue them for that discrimination? I've heard that, and on Solidarity, we'll sue them if they have that discriminatory practice. And the other thing is, if we give in to all of this, and they can, Ted Sarandos said, oh, we're okay till October because we have stockpiled all these scripts. We're fine. From here on in, they can stockpile all our digital replicas. And if we're trying to fight for more in 2025, and they go, you know what? We got stockpiled you. We don't need you. what happens then? So those are my concerns. I love you. This is difficult. It's painful for me to even have to say this. So what is the mechanism to protect Scarlett Johansson can sue for them using, but I can't sue. Is this legal department going to sue for me? That's my question.
So, I really appreciate the question, and I'm glad we were able to get them in. So first of all, when you say retaliation, I mean, I understand why it feels like retaliation. But let me just be real honest with you. It's not retaliation legally, okay? Any more than if the company says to you, are you willing to relocate to Vancouver for 6 months, and you say no, and they say, well, then we're not gonna hire you. That's not retaliation either. If they say to you, are you willing to do this nude scene or this sex scene, and you say no, then
Decorum,
excuse me,
decorum,
I'm sorry,
please.
I didn't
Please,
interrupt any
hello?
of you. And it'd be great if I could just finish my answer. That'd be awesome. Thanks. And if you decline to do a nude scene or a sex scene that's part of a project's requirements, then they can decline to hire you because of that. That's not legally retaliation. I know it may feel like retaliation, but it's not. If they want or need a digital replica as part of the hiring for a project, then you have every right to say no to it. They also have a right not to hire you and to hire someone else who's willing to do a digital replica. That's the reality. Now, having said that, if you've already been hired and they didn't ask you that, or they asked you and they said, we want a digital replica just for insurance purposes, and now they come back to you and say, actually, we've decided we want to do reshoots, and we want to do this, and we want to do that with your digital replica, and you say no, and they say, okay, well, we're recasting you and we're not going to pay you, 100% our legal department will come and we will file a grievance for you. We will arbitrate that. We'll file a lawsuit if we have to. And we will get you paid for that. Yeah, and you can write those words down because that is absolutely the case because that they cannot do. But as part of your initial hiring, if you say I won't do a digital replica, it is the same as if you say you won't do something else that is an essential part of that role, and they can decide to move on and cast someone else. That's the reality.
There will always be a hungry actor who will say yes, and they'll stockpile it.
And as far as the stockpiling question goes, that was your second point. I do want to just note, they can't just stockpile digital replicas, okay? They have to have specific, detailed, informed consent for each use of those digital replicas. So unless they have imagined every possible use and gotten you to agree to every possible use in advance, which they actually can't do for projects you haven't been engaged for yet under the terms of this agreement, they can't make use of those digital replicas. If they do, then absolutely we'll sue them because it'll be a breach of consent and they will be on the hook for damages, significant damages as a result of that, in my view. So we do have a recourse in that scenario.
Thank you so much for your question. Mike 1.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was also just reminded you had also mentioned the writer has to be a human part. So let's talk about that for a minute in terms of the Writers Guild provision. The DGA agreement and the Writers Guild agreement are different than our contracts. In the Writers Guild agreement, there are mandatory requirements to hire writers. There are requirements to hire certain personnel in the DGA agreement. There are not requirements under our contract to hire actors. There is nothing in this contract that says that any production has to hire an actor, a background actor, a stunt performer, or any kind of performer at all. So I ask you, what would happen if we just adopted the same strategy that the Writers Guild or the Directors Guild chose, which is to define an actor as being only a human being? The answer is, yeah, oh, sure, that sounds really great. That sounds great, but what would actually happen? What would actually happen is there would continue to be no protection for digital replicas, and they would say, we're not hiring an actor. We're hiring a synthetic fake. We don't need an actor. What you need is actual protection against what these companies might do, not something that just sounds great but doesn't actually protect you. And I'm telling you right now, getting some, it would have been easy to just get them to say something, oh, actors are humans, sure, we'll agree to that. And you would have had zero protection and something you could say, oh, I feel good because they acknowledge actors are humans. But that's not the reality. The reality is what you need is protection against them doing stuff without your consent, protection against them using generative AI to create fake actors and using them without having to notify anyone or having to pay for it. That's why we fought for those provisions. And our contracts are different, our members are different, and the strategy had to be different. The Writers Guild AI provision is, I don't know, a page or two. Ours is going to be 15 or 16 pages. Why? Because that's what it took to put in a sufficient minimum level of protection for actors. And again, I totally respect your questions, and I totally respect everyone in this room who may disagree with me on this, but just know we're all coming from the same place, which is a devotion to protecting actors. And in my view, this is the way to do that, not by getting a platitude that says actors are humans that has no legal enforceability or any ability to protect you.
Okay. So I just want to let you know this is 10 o'clock now, which is when we were going to close the meeting. We're going to extend the meeting till just before 11 when we have to leave. So I just want you to all, when you heard that my phone go off, it's because I put 2 minutes down. So if you're speaking, you're making a statement, you're asking a question, that's your 2-minute thing. So I'm not doing it on purpose, it's just here. So please, we have about 30 more people with questions, I believe. I'm looking at it loosely. So let's continue. And if you can be mindful of your time, your 2 minutes. Okay.
And I just want to thank everybody for being here. I'm very impressed with all of you for coming out and your questions. And it's a smart group of people, and obviously Duncan's smart. So it's a very interesting dialogue, and I'm grateful for it.
Okay. Mic 1.
Because we're running over time, can we limit leadership to the same amount of time that we have? I would like to make a motion that they are limited to the same amount of time we have to ask questions.
Well, since I'm the main one who's been talking, I just promise you I'll try to be briefer. How's that? Is that okay? Because I'm not trying to use up your time. I just want to make sure I give complete responses, but I'll be as fast as I can.
Thank you. Mic 1, please.
Hi, I'm Scott Lambright. I'm a voice actor.
Please get closer to your mic, please.
Hi, Scott Lambright. I'm a voice actor and a looper, and I want to make sure with the AI language that it's not just covering things like a spoken language. A lot of times we work on things, we're making fictional language for aliens, we're screaming as zombies and creatures. I want to make sure the language includes everything so they can't get around their proposal. Say, okay, well, it's all just blah, 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 blah. And I want to make sure the language is completely airtight for us to not be replaced and say, well, this took place on X planet, so don't worry about it. All those Star Wars shows, we're done with that. So I want to make sure the language is there to protect all of us. Same thing with on-camera performers, a noticeable feature or face. When someone's screaming, you can't really argue that that's a noticeable feature because a lot of times they're like, well, I don't know who scream that is. So I want to make sure that that provision's in there to protect us, to make sure that anything a voice makes or a human makes, breath, anything like that, is protected and covered. Thank you.
Sure. No, thanks for the question. So if it's a performance, as far as digital replication goes, it's protected. So it doesn't matter whether it's what language it is specifically or anything like that. But I do want to note just the recognizable feature language that you're referencing, that's part of the generative AI piece specifically. And that is an individual consent right for performers who have a recognizable feature incorporated into a synthetic fake. So that does not apply to voice acting. So I just want to be clear. The protection for voice acting that's contained in generative AI is the notice and the bargaining requirement. So if they decide to create a synthetic voice and use that, they must notify us. And when they notify us, we will then negotiate for compensation or for payment structure for that makes it non-economically advantageous for them to do it. That's what our strategy is for dealing with voice acting as it relates to synthetic fakes. But the recognizable feature piece doesn't connect to voice acting.
Thank you. And thanks to the ASL interpreters, thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, microphone 2.
Hi,
Hi, my name's Joey Alley. I'm an actor and also a writer and director. I just want to start by saying thank you so much. I know you guys have been fighting so hard for all of us, and I know that these are hard-won concessions. It's a hard-won contract. There are so many wonderful things in this contract. That being said, moving on, I do have concerns about AI. I share Karen's existential concern. This is something that has caused me to feel like I want to go back to theater, honestly, thinking about this happening. And also I love theater, but you know, anyways. I just wanted to take part of my time to read this. So my biggest concern with this is actually and also coming to this place as a director, is the internal, inside of the scene, editing that can take place with your double. It says that you are protected from your performance being meaningfully adjusted outside of, quote, editing, arranging, rearranging, revising, or manipulating a photography and or a soundtrack for purposes of cosmetics, wardrobe, noise reduction, timing or speed, continuity, pitch or tone, clarity, addition of visual sound effects or filters, standards and practices, ratings, and adjustment in dialogue or narration or other similar purposes. Now, aside from the artistry concerns I have around this and being able to create a performance and create it with the director, or when I'm a director, being able to create it with the performer and have the space and time to do that, aside from the artistry possibly being broken up or seeing our performances manipulated, my actual concern, more specifically my question, comes from this. You specifically said, Duncan, and I agree, that they will always try to get it as cheap and fast as possible, right? They're just going to try and get it for as cheap as possible. When we talk about incentivizing them to hire live performances versus our synthetic doubles, we are not, and we try to parody make those things the same cost. They're never going to be the same cost because you have to have an entire set for a live actor to be there. So automatically, to me, the synthetic is preferable. Secondly, I'm concerned about the days. When you have an actor on set, what is to say that a producer cannot now say to the director, hey, we're going to get one take of this because once we've image captured this performance in this space, we can change anything we want to forever in post. What is to stop them from shooting effectively an entire feature film in one day if they can get us into every single location on that day? Thank you.
So, great questions. First of all, appreciate that, and I appreciate you reading the detail. So anybody who's gone to the summary and really looked at the detail, I have to give you props for that, so thank you for doing that. As far as your point about synthetics and the impact of not having to pay for locations, sets, crews, et cetera, I mean, you're right. There's only so much we can do to protect against that. I do think that the negotiation provisions will be quite effective as it relates to the use of synthetics in combination with live action performances, because of course that wouldn't be the case then. For example, if they're using synthetic performers to fill out a crowd scene, if they're using synthetic performers to do certain kinds of voiceover work, et cetera, where they wouldn't have been tied to crews or to sets or to locations, et cetera. So I do think we're going to have to keep monitoring that, and that's one of the benefits of having a notice requirement is every time they do it, we're going to get a notice about it. We're going to be able to investigate it, determine what kinds of stuff they're doing, and how we can best address it if it requires addressing. And of course, I'm keeping to come back to your fellow member over there whose name I've somehow forgotten, I apologize, who was saying, pointing that out to the community may also be an effective tool. What stops them from doing a scene in a day that would have taken a lot longer by using digital replication? So number one, if they're using digital replication under the employment-based digital replica terms, they have to pay for that in the way that it would have traditionally been done, the amount of time that would have been required to shoot that scene. So they can't say, oh, well, the digital replica could do this scene in one day, but a human performer would have taken a week to do this scene. They have to pay based on the week, not pay based on the digital replica's time to do it. So perhaps from your expression on your face, I'm interpreting that maybe I misunderstood your point or misunderstood your question. But the fact of the matter is, using digital replicas will, in some cases, create efficiencies for them. But let's not forget, they also have to pay for the cost of creating the digital replica, of using the digital replica, and that isn't free either. So when you balance all of those factors out, I think during the term of this contract, we have good reason to believe that we can negotiate terms for synthetics that will actually make it not economically beneficial to use them, at least in a large number of cases. And the digital replica provisions will give our members consent and control over the use of their own image in ways they do not have right now.
have to follow up on that. I guess my real question though is who is going to be overseeing how long a scene would have taken? Because there's actually no way to pre-see that. I certainly know that as a director. You work with an actor and you find a performance over the course of many takes sometimes and over the course of finding it together. Why am I now not going to be cut off after one take from my producer saying, or two takes, let's say, so I can blend the two, and when I say, and there it was, and is from the first take, there is from the second take, it is from the, you can...
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. So, number one, the producer has to initially make that determination. Number two, we have a wealth of data about how long things have taken when they have been done. Obviously not on that same project, but historically, we have Exhibit Gs and other records that go back for many years that tell us how long different types of work takes. And so my expectation is if we get a performer who comes forward and says, hey, I saw this project and my digital replica did a lot more work than I got paid for. It looked like 2 or 3 weeks worth of work and they paid me for a day or they paid me for 1 week or whatever, then we can go back and audit that production and we can file a claim to secure additional payment for them. And I fully expect that we will do that because it is really important that we make sure that the use of digital replicas, the cost factors attached to that approximate the cost factors attached to the engagement of that performer, both for that one performer's benefit, but also for the collective benefit that comes from that.
Okay, I'm sorry, it's time. Microphone number 1. And I just want to say, Duncan has a lot to say to answer certain questions, and we appreciate it.
Was that too long? Is that what that meant?
No. Was it? No, it was fine. Well,
Just checking.
She did say that a while ago, but
I'm
Fran,
trying to keep it short, but
Fran really
just
wanted...
give me the signal.
We
give
just
me
wanted...
the hook, the big hook. Just whoop.
Okay, that's enough saying it. Microphone number 1.
Hi there, James, stunt performer, mocap guy. I used to run a mocap stage, so I know all about this because I worked with the spearhead of people that did this, that made digital doubles and actually created the tech that does what we're all worried about. First and foremost, thank you, negotiating committee, board members, staff, captains, WGA, IATSE, AFM, Actors Equity, healthcare workers, non-union performers, strike babies, strike puppies, and goats, and all those that joined us over the 118 brutal days. You're all showing phenomenal resilience, strength, and tenacity. Hydrate and rest when you can. Also, we lost friends and family during this, and I just wanted to give them a moment of silence. I do. As a union, we should say no to scanning as an official stance. The union, SAG, should have and should be saying as an official stance no to scanning for every performer. I know that we can't officially make people take that stance on work, but we as a union should say that because as assets happen, the more they get, the more we are replaced. That is a guarantee, that is not a hypothetical. So currently studios do funny accounting. They break contractual obligations and do everything they can do to dance around requirements and maximize their money while exploiting and abusing us. Claims are constant and consistent, and the process is backed up with months between communications. With digital assets, it's impossible to track transgressions. Impossible. I'm telling you this as someone who works in the field. I could send you guys for a loop and you would never find what I did, and I could use all of you to make the projects that I make. What I'm saying is that you can change the color of the hair, skin, eyes. You can add sunglasses, hats, helmets, and other wardrobe or physical tweaks to hide any recognizable physicalities to sidestep financial obligations. It is not costly to use this tech unless you use a third party, which is what they're doing now, which is like going to a dealership for repairs. You're going to pay a lot, but they're doing in-house now. I have a whole lot. Obviously, I'm out of time, so I'm just going to skip to my questions. Can we start working with... I believe that the studio people, we need studio people at this type of thing. We need to have them involved in the conversation because they need to understand what it is, and we need to work with them to come to a conclusion because it is a complicated solution that we have to work towards, and we can't tie their hands against third parties that they're competing with. So we need to find a way together that we can move this forward in a way that's productive. So are we taking any steps to connect them to our community to look at doing this in a team effort? And then also last two questions that button onto that. Are there any buttons left over from the W&B Netflix studios? Because I missed those buttons. And do we have a slush fund to chip in for a pizza party for our captains? Thank you.
Hold on for a second. Ray, do you want to answer some of those questions? Duncan?
I think that's so. Yeah, first of all, look, I understand the desire to say no to scanning. I understand it. I totally understand it. There was no scenario where we were going to be able to prohibit scanning or digital replication in this contract. So just, I mean, you can want that and you can know that that would be great and also recognize that it is not achievable or doable. And that's why you have to put the best possible protections in place that you can, as opposed to taking a stand that does not actually result in real protection for our members. And that's what ultimately this committee had to address. Are we or can we start working with the studios? Absolutely. It was in the presentation. We already have an agreement to meet with those companies twice a year to discuss what's going on with AI and to work together with them. Although, when you said we can't tie their hands with respect to third parties, that's exactly what they said to us throughout this negotiation. That's one of the things they kept saying to us about why they couldn't do certain things that we ultimately convinced them to do anyway through the application of pressure from our strike and through our negotiation. And so, the entirety of the generative AI part of this agreement, they didn't want to do because they said you're tying our hands in comparison to third parties. So I just, the problem is we can't say, number one, let's ban it, and number two, let's work with them and not tie their hands in comparison to third parties, because those are two completely contradictory results that can't coexist with each other. So I think what we've done is actually push them as far as they could be pushed on generative AI and also on digital replication in this negotiation, with great result in terms of improved protections. Is it perfect? No, I'm not making the argument that it is, if you haven't heard that already, clearly saying that. But is this the best protection that could be negotiated in this contract at this time with the leverage that we have at our disposal? I believe the answer to that is yes. As far as the slush fund for a captain's event, yes, I think we've got a captain's event already planned for next week, I believe, or something's happening on that soon. So yes, we are definitely eager to take care of our captains and make sure they know how much they're appreciated. And so we're working on something for them right now. So thank you. Thank you for suggesting it. I appreciate it.
Okay. Microphone number 2.
Hello, my name is Heather Ashley Boyer, and I'm an actor. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you answering our questions. So a little bit about myself. I've been out on the picket line since day one talking about AI specifically. That was my #1 concern. Thank you, yes. And I first heard about AI and the degree at which it was accelerating 3.5 years ago. No one was talking about it. Everyone thought it was ridiculous, but here we are. So that being said, what we're doing here sets precedent for 3 years from now when we renegotiate. Not even 3 years, 2.5 years. So my concern, honestly, every day I have a new concern about what's in the contract right now. So my concern today is that I feel that there are too many loopholes that the studios will be exploiting. For example, to create a synthetic actor, they will be able to type, create a character who looks like Walter White from Breaking Bad into a generative AI program, and legally, the studios will owe Bryan Cranston nothing. 0 money. Thank you. Because even though it's his face for all practical purposes, the studios did not input his name into the AI generator. So this is just one of the many loopholes that I'm concerned about. What is your response to that? Like, what is your solution? What is your plan? Because I honestly feel like there is no real plan, especially around synthetic performers or synthetic actors, whatever we're calling them. Thank you. Yes.
Thanks. No, I appreciate that question very much. So first of all, if Bryan Cranston, either in the form of Walter White or in any other form, is turned into a digital avatar, right? That falls under the digital replica provision, not under the synthetic performer provision. The synthetic performer provision only applies to a creation that does not resemble any actual human being. So if it resembles Bryan Cranston, which was the premise of your question, then the consent provisions and the payment provisions of the digital replica part of this contract all apply. They're all enforceable through grievance and arbitration. They would have to get his informed consent to create it. They would have to get his consent to the specific detailed use, right? And they would have to compensate him accordingly. So really, that is covered by this contract. That scenario that you just hypothesized is completely covered by this contract. Now, it's not to diminish your concerns about generative AI and synthetic fakes, which are, creations that don't resemble any one particular person. And I've already mentioned what our sort of approach and strategy to that is regarding notice and, of course, negotiation for compensation. And if it contains any recognizable features, then that additional consent provision is triggered. But for a specific actor who's going to be using any digital technology, generative AI or otherwise, that creates a replica of them, they are absolutely covered under the digital replication provisions of this contract.
Okay, thank you. Microphone 1.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Your name?
I'm Jesse, captain with these lovely captains from Paramount. And I'm going to work through this, and I'm going to run out before I get attacked. I participated in the WW meetings, and I come from the background world. And when I listened to those WW meetings, and I was terrified that background was going to be left in the dust. And every day I am listening for one solid reason why I should vote no on this contract, and I can't hear it. Because you guys came so hard for background, and I just, I was really terrified that we were not gonna be even considered for another 3, 6, 12, 24 years, whatever. And the way you guys came through for us, I am terrified that if this contract does not get ratified, that it will ruin a lot of people that need this, because it is a life changer for a lot of people, me included. And I just want to thank you. And with that, I do have one hope. Part of background, there is sometimes we have to audition. And so if we have to audition for a featured role in a background scene, I do hope that it's on your radar that we are considered for residuals. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You should also thank Ron Ostro and Samantha Hartson, your representatives on the negotiating committee.
Those are our background experts.
Experts, exactly. Okay, going to microphone number 2, please. Hi.
Is it on? Hello.
Yes.
Hi, good evening. Kristen Ariza. I have a statement and a question. So I've heard a lot from the Zoom call the other night as well, a lot of talk about if something happens because this is new, that claims need to be filed. Specifically with this summary that we've gotten so far, and my hopes is that this contract is different, but a contract should be written, not be written vaguely and then clarified through litigation. A contract should be written with clarity and specifics and taken to litigation only if there is a breach. So one question is, do we have the administrative power to monitor closely, which has been said a lot tonight, what will ultimately become an abuse of power from the AMPTP? That's question 1. My second question that I also had asked, Duncan, you had mentioned on a Zoom that with regards to the bonus structure, that there was only a handful of shows that met that threshold of the 20% domestic subscriber to reach that threshold. So my question is, which shows? I would love to know the names of these handful of shows that actually met that, because There are thousands of shows on any streaming service, streaming platform, and if only a handful have met this residual bonus, that doesn't bode well. And what I had said the other night on this Zoom was, unless you have Reese Witherspoon or the like helming your show, most shows are the little show that could, that don't even get eyes in those first 60 days. So I know it's been mentioned before that it's going to take, that the AMPTP doesn't have any incentive to push shows to the top of their platform, but I'm just curious, right now, in the metrics used to put that on the contract, which shows were those?
So to your first question about the administrative power to review what the AMPTP is doing, I'm assuming in that regard you're talking about AI, or I'm not sure exactly which provision you're referring to. But
yes, we can speak about AI, but there's been a few things that it had mentioned. The NEGCOM committee,
Right.
said.
Contract enforcement in
Yeah.
general, right? I mean,
Yes.
yes. I mean, we have a whole team of staff whose job it is to do that. Now, I will note, during this strike this summer, this has been an all-hands-on-deck situation. So those of you who are out on picket lines probably know that a bunch of our staff who normally do other jobs were out there on those picket lines helping to make sure those picket lines could happen and things like that. So I do want to say, if during the course of this summer it took a little longer than usual for us to get back to you about something, I mean, we tried very hard to make sure that didn't impact core activities like residuals processing, for example, or contract enforcement. Obviously, with the strike being over, those staff are back to their regular duties, and they'll be continuing to do that. And I fully expect that if this contract, when this contract is ratified, that we will need to add additional resources for contract enforcement, and that's something that the National Board will see in a proposed budget from me and our finance CFO and our finance team in the coming fiscal year. But so yes, so we will have the resources that are needed to do that. That's not to say it won't be a challenge. That's not to say we won't have to develop some new tools. As a matter of fact, one of the things we've been looking to do is harness AI to actually help us with our contract enforcement techniques. Because, if they're going to use AI in the industry, we should use AI too, to fight against any kind of unauthorized use or inappropriate action on the part of those companies. As far as the handful of shows, maybe I should have said more than a handful. I'm not sure exactly how many shows fit in a hand, but it's not a huge number. It's like 40 or 50, something like that. I have to check. I suspect we do not have the ability to reveal the names of all of those shows publicly to the membership. That's not because there's not going to be verification of that on an ongoing basis. There will be, and in fact, this contract contains a right for us to have a third-party auditor verify the viewership figures by which those shows end up on the list. But what I really want to just emphasize to everyone is, for us, originally we wanted to tie this to revenue. We didn't originally want this to be the metric by which the money came in to what we were looking to do. As in any negotiation, you don't get everything you want. So once, I think it was quite public how hard we fought for a revenue attachment, the CEOs made it clear directly to our faces they would never agree to a revenue attachment, so we had to pivot. And what we pivoted to is this metric, which uses subscriber levels and viewership counts to determine essentially how much money comes in. Our goal was to make sure that that was enough money. We weren't fixated on the number of shows because we knew we wanted to get a distribution fund so that however many shows were on that list, as long as it generated enough money, it could be distributed in a way that actually made a difference for performers working in streaming. And that's what we did. So the projection that we've given you on the valuation of this number, which is approximately $40 million a year, that is based on actual data from last year in terms of how many shows hit the thresholds across all the streaming platforms, and based on our projection, based on current viewership information that we have access to, how that looks for the coming term of the contract. Assuming that that projection is accurate, and our projections in the past have been very accurate, then that amount of money will be generated, and we intend to deploy it correctly in the way that we've talked about earlier in the presentation. So I guess what I'm saying to you is I think what's more important than the number of shows is that it generates the amount of money that we need in order to make sure that people working in streaming can have that additional money to help create a sustainable career and not not have that be made impossible by the short seasons and long hiatuses. That's the goal.
No, we're at time. I'm sorry. We have 30 more people here. I'm sorry.
Fair enough. I will just leave with this. I understand the criteria and the 25%, but what you're saying about that 40% is that 75 is going to the cast and whomever of the show, and then that 25 divvied up, we don't know how just yet. So you're saying
Right.
that is supposed to cover the rest of the people contributing to streaming services, the rest of the shows.
I mean, I don't know if it will cover all of the shows, but it will cover shows other than the ones that generate, the other ones that already got paid from the 75%, let's put it that way. And, would we like that figure to be higher? Yes. Do we expect to negotiate over that again in 2.5 years? Yes. But you know what you have to do first is establish the structure. This is a structure that has never existed before in this contract. And now that we have it, all we have to do is negotiate to get more money into it. We don't have to fight to create it again. And that's something that's really important in all of our contracts is build the structures and then we can build upon them. And that's what we did in this negotiation.
Thank you. Microphone number 1, please.
Hi, I'm Catherine Lidzone, newly elected to the LA Local Board and served as an alternate at the National Board meeting where this contract, the summary of the tentative agreement was voted upon. First of all, I just want to say I respect every single person on this stage tremendously. I know how hard you guys have worked. I've heard how hard you guys have worked. We need you. So thank you for everything you're doing. I just want to share some concerns, so I'm going to be using my time as a statement, and it is going to involve questions that I think all the members need to be thinking about. So here are my concerns for you and for them. For member context, not only were we not provided the full MOA contract language before the National Board vote, but union leadership also did not share more specific 100-page plus proposed contract language from the negotiating committee for pre-review. The only documentation we received was provided 30 minutes before a meeting, which arguably determines the fate of 160,000 members. My questions for leadership and members to think about. 1, why did the press get notified before membership was alerted of an end to the strike? 2, you say the AMPTP threatened to cancel shows. Why is this an acceptable reason for stopping negotiations? Is this not classic fear-mongering that the AMPTP is famous for? Why was the official union language, strike is over, and I quote, when technically the strike was actually suspended, and not only did the membership nor the National Board not yet vote for the tentative agreement, they haven't even had the opportunity to read it. 3, you say we used all leverage we could, but this is inherently not true. Why did we never call for a boycott on streaming companies? If you are so passionate about the inimitable value of humans in performance, why did we not secure this definition in negotiations? We know historically that it has never happened where membership has not ratified the contract after a National Board approval. In my opinion, it is fear-mongering from our own union leadership to tell us that a worse deal is expected should we stand for better terms. If producers are not required to change the footage in the event of violation of consent, what is to stop them from intentionally betraying what we have given them permission for and taking a slap on the wrist fine hit for doing so? How can we trust that the streaming fund will not be mismanaged, considering some members have not had satisfactory results from myriad complaints filed in regards to unpaid residuals? Who determines what constitutes as substantially as scripted? What if there's a disagreement that the journeyman actor cannot afford to pursue in court? And finally, why do we still have no protections over the intellectual property provided in self-tapes, which ultimately is exploited by the AMPTP for profit? Thank you. I do think you are all amazing. These are the things that we care about and can't afford to pursue on our own. We don't have the name status, we don't have the power, we don't have the money. This is why we need our union. Thank you.
So I'm going to assume, I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 questions in there. I'm going to assume that I'm not going to respond to the process questions, that those are more rhetorical, and I'll just focus on the substance questions, since that's what I assume is most relevant to this meeting. And if I try to respond to all 10 of them, then no one else is going to get to ask any questions. So I guess number 1, the definition of actors, I already talked about that, I already answered that question, so I'm not going to just repeat that answer, but I don't think you should want a definition of actors as humans that doesn't actually achieve anything other than a feel-good moment and is unenforceable and doesn't protect you from replacement by synthetics or by digital replicas. That's why that's not in there. Number two, I think it is my responsibility and everybody's responsibility up here to be honest with you about what will happen in the event that there is a no vote on this contract. And respectfully, I think describing that as fear-mongering is completely and utterly wrong. It's not fear-mongering at all. You should know what the consequences of your actions are, and there are consequences. There will be consequences to a choice not to ratify this contract, just like there are consequences to a choice of ratifying it. And so, I've been very careful not to fearmonger and to give you the most accurate description that I can of what I think could happen in the event that the contract is not ratified, and ultimately it's the members' choice whether they do or don't do that. As far as this statement about concern about mismanagement of the streaming fund, we've had a similar fund in our sound recordings code for more than 10 years. So far as I'm aware, there's never been any assertion of mismanagement or concerns about that. You talk about your concern about residuals payments not being made on time. Residuals payments are not managed by a jointly trusteed fund. Residuals payments are made by the companies directly, and then we process them. So this is a completely different process, and I don't think you should have any reason to be concerned about mismanagement of a jointly trusteed fund. As a matter of fact, this provides a kind of flexibility and opportunity to give more people access to the equivalent of these streaming bonus payments. I think our members should be excited about that, not fearful of a streaming fund. And let's see. You said that there's no protections to your IP and your self-tapes, so the intellectual property that's created in terms of those self-tapes, there is a prohibition, if I recall correctly, and Ray will correct me if I'm wrong, there is a prohibition on any use being made of those self-tapes for any purpose other than auditions, and so that is a limitation on their having any right to your intellectual property created in your self-tapes. As far as, did we use all of our leverage? You said that we should have engaged in a boycott of streaming companies. I can assure you we had a full discussion of that, and the negotiating committee did consider when the appropriate time to pull the trigger on that was. By the way, during the part of this strike in which there was the Writers Guild going on and there was overlap, that was also a topic that would have required coordination between us and discussions between us. But ultimately, it wasn't because of a threat to cancel shows. It wasn't that anybody was intimidated by that. It was a realization and a recognition of actual economic reality in the industry, which was that there were going to be shows canceled. There were shows canceled, by the way, possibly some of you worked on them, that were canceled as a result of these circumstances. And so it's not a question of a threat or bowing to a threat from the companies. It was a question of evaluating when our maximum leverage would be. And they didn't want to cancel those projects. They didn't want to have theatrical releases that they had to cancel, which gave us more leverage, and that's why, in my view, we were able to get the concessions on generative AI that we got on the last day of the strike, is because we used that leverage correctly. I understand people may have a different view on that. That's certainly fine, but I'm just saying that from my perspective, that's the answer. And then as far as substantially as scripted, who's going to interpret that? Well, we'll interpret it in determining if there was compliance or not with that provision, and if there's a dispute over that, we'll take it to grievance and arbitration, and a neutral arbitrator will interpret it just like every other provision in the contract. Thanks.
Thank you. Jack.
No, are we going to let Jack talk?
Yes. No.
Okay.
What?
Should we put it up to a vote?
That's a hard act to follow.
Yeah.
Come on.
Welcome to the board, Catherine.
All right, you're taking his time up.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jack.
Jack Herman, 35-year member. Thank you. Member of the Sexual Harassment Committee and co-chair of the Child Protection Subcommittee. I've been a burr in your side for the last couple of years. Poring over every single contract of this union as it relates to child protection, the education, the welfare, and hiring of minors. My condominium turned into a scene from The Paper Chase. That's how many contracts I had scattered all over the floor. And sadly, and first of all, I respect everybody in this room. I respect every single one of you. I've got to know so many of you during this action. All of you that walked the line, all of you that were out there day after day doing what you needed to do to get these folks up there to get what we need, even if there are disagreements. I myself, I'm fundamentally disappointed, though, that we didn't go further in revising Section 50 of the CBA, and that's regarding the protection of minor members. I'm grateful for the gains.
Say it into the microphone.
I'm sorry.
We missed that last part.
I said I'm fundamentally disappointed that we did not go further in revising Section 50 of the CBA regarding the protection of minor members. I'm grateful for the gains we did achieve and that the door that's been open for further discussion down the road. And I'm going to be there down the road watching and listening and getting involved. I would like to ask one fundamental question regarding the background checks, which is located in Section 18. That's that long list that we didn't get into, which is paragraph G, and it has to do with a phrase called may. In subparagraph 1, it says the producer may conduct a background check as it pertains to teachers, etc. And subparagraph 2, it says the producer may require a background check as a condition of employment. Why does it not say shall or will? Why does it say may?
So it says may because it is within the producer's discretion to determine whether that background check is warranted. What the producers needed from us was our consent to be able to do that. And that consent was granted in the course of this negotiation in order to encourage them to perform those background checks. So we granted them what they needed in order to do what it is that you want them to do in the course of this negotiation. We also achieved an improvement for legally emancipated minors to receive education.
Correct.
All the other proposals that you're referencing to amend Section 50 were all thoroughly considered and vetted in the wages and working conditions process.
Right.
But outside of a few of the proposals that we achieved, not all of them were brought to the table. I say that in a context of us having brought to the table the most substantial proposal package we have ever delivered to the AMPTP. It was over 40 pages of proposals. It was quite a whump that sounded when we dropped that on the table. So, you know, we were not stingy about the proposals that we brought to this negotiations. We brought certain proposals for minor performers. We achieved certain proposals for minor performers. We understand that you have a desire to use our contract to harmonize state law provisions, and that's something we can continue to examine.
Right.
But it was not something that was brought to the table here.
And I understand that, and I appreciate that. Do you consider, though, the word may a loophole where producers will exploit to not bring background checks to the set?
I don't consider it a loophole in this context because they want to do the background checks, which is why they asked for our consent to do it. So we gave them what they asked for.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Microphone number 1, please.
I'm Tim Blaney. I'm a member of the Puppeteers Committee.
And I'm Kristen Charney. I'm co-chair of the SAG Puppeteers Committee. I have 2 questions. The first is about the generative AI, of course. In the puppeteers community, there is much concern about specific language in Section 2, subsection 2. That language does not apply to non-human characters. The large percentage of a puppeteer's work is bringing non-human characters to life, sometimes as a single performer and sometimes as part of a group. We play anthropomorphic characters, creatures, monsters, inanimate objects like furniture, plants, etc., 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 and most of those are non-human. If this contract is ratified, is there anything that can be done to protect puppeteers from this specific language?
So, sure. First of all, thank you for the question. And I just want to, so everyone's clear, we're talking now about generative AI specifically.
Yes.
That's in the generative AI section of the contract. And it's interesting because I got a previous question about this, not from puppeteers, but from performers who work in certain types of sci-fi projects where they portray non-human characters, and the concern was, what's the scope of this, and does it incorporate us or not? And the understanding as to what this language refers to is non-humanoid characters, meaning things like something that doesn't appear to have been created with a human as the base for that character. So that was the answer for them, and I think they were largely satisfied with that answer. I'm not sure that answer is as satisfying for puppeteers, other than just to note, like, what we're fighting for, or we're fighting here in terms of synthetic character generation, is hard to distinguish from animation when you talk about something that is completely non-human in form at all. So I guess the question that I would ask you is, or that I would ask you to consider is, how we distinguish that between animation and a generative AI synthetic creation of a non-human appearing character. And I think that is an area where we're going to have to continue to work. We certainly don't want puppeteers' livelihoods to be impacted by that, but defining that distinction in contract language is a bit of a challenge.
Let me add as well that the definition of synthetic performer includes anything that is voiced by a human performer. So if there's a human performer giving it a voice, the language that you're talking about, it wouldn't be applicable to that circumstance. And while I'm talking, I want to supplement my answer to Jack and just let you know, Jack, that we did bring a proposal and achieve a proposal that for welfare workers, teachers, or anyone who performs a similar function on set, the background checks are mandatory.
Yeah, come.
Okay. Yeah, we're not
Please.
going to get through all this. We have less than 15 minutes, so.
Well, that's what we've been trying to do, but people have not listened to what I've said. So, have you answered their question, Duncan? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay.
Well, I don't have anything more to say.
I just want to say, is there anyone on the lines that has a question that's not AI? Okay.
Not Andrew.
Well, wait a second, because we've heard a lot of AI questions, and there's other issues here. So, okay. Well,
Oh, Jody?
what?
I'm sorry.
Hold on.
They
What?
aren't done, apparently, and they've still got 36 seconds on the
Okay, they
their
have
clock.
36 seconds. That's correct.
Okay, my other question is regarding performance capture. Puppeteers often do work that is very related to performance capture. Will often puppeteer characters during principal photography, deliver dialogue, take direction from the director, and that will be animated in post. And we have to fight to keep our principal contracts for these roles. So we've often even been told by SAG to sign an inappropriate contract and grieve it later. Are these jobs now considered performance capture?
No, there's a complete separate definition of puppeteers that remains in the agreement. So those jobs are not now considered performance capture. If I'm recalling the circumstance, well, I don't know what specific circumstance you're referring to where folks have been asked to sign an inappropriate contract and grieve. Yeah, but that is a situation where there were specific facts present that made it more advantageous to pursue that route rather than asking people to give up work potentially and then file a grievance. So, we can talk more about that. It's probably more specific than the whole room needs to hear about. But the combination of duties that were involved created some trouble for us in that circumstance. And by the way, it is labor law that we cannot instruct you not to work except for a very narrowly defined set of circumstances that involve safety. If the issue can be resolved in a grievance, we're actually required to grieve it. We can't say to a performer, stop rendering services. That's considered a wildcat strike, and it generates liability for the union and potentially for you. So unfortunately, we are sometimes in a situation where that is the advice that we have to give you.
That's good.
Okay. So, Terry, and I think because there's so many people here, we have 10 minutes. And I want to take as many as I can, but let's have a list of both the lines so the next time we have another session, right, then they can ask their questions. Duncan?
We're going to have a webinar on Saturday.
Yeah, so then you could write them down or.
And then once the MOA is released, then we'll have another more meaningful conversation, I'm sure. And we have until December 5th, so.
Yeah.
Why don't we take Mike 2?
Okay, let's take Mike 2. Is it on something other than AI?
We'll be quick. I mean, we've just
Okay.
talked so fast. Here we go. Hi, my name's Andrew Leeds. I'm an LA local board member. That's nice. Part of the reason that I ran was because I felt there was a little bit of a lack of transparency going into the negotiation, which I didn't feel with the WGA, which I'm also a member of. So I ran to try to get transparency and to get information to our members, which is why I would like to interview some of the staff to talk about the contract points, because I feel like I could ask a lot of good questions and get those out there. So I hope that can happen, so I can bring some information to these very complex things which cannot be done right here, right now, obviously. So I'm sure there's a lot of great things. Here's my quick question for you. Okay, I get hired for a one-day guest star, okay? One-day guest star on any show, it doesn't matter. And they say to me, oh, they show me the script, and they crammed all my scenes into one day, of course, because they wanted to only pay me for one day, right? But it turns out there's another scene, there's a party scene that I'm, like, I have to be at the party because it makes sense, and I'm in the background, right? But they're gonna scan me on day one, right? They're not shooting the party scene for like another 2 weeks, right? So they're gonna pay me for day one, and then they're gonna pay me for the party scene, right? So normally, I would have gotten a top of show guest star. I would have made around, in the whole contract, like $9,500. Now I'm going to be making around 2 times 1082. So is that the case, or am I wrong? Am I going to go from making $9,500 to making 2 times 1082, so around $2,200? Did you follow that?
I don't follow what's different in that situation as a result of any of the contract terms.
Because if I was hired for more than one day on a network show and now these other shows, they would have to pay me for the full episode, which was a lot of the way that people make their money and make their health insurance. And this happened to a friend of mine on a Shonda Rhimes show about 7 months ago, where he wasn't paid his top of show because they were able to get around it by doing that. Are we protected for that?
The one-day exception is still in the contract. What has changed is that there will be circumstances now where you will be able to get that top of show major role for high-budget SVOD half hours, high-budget SVOD hours, first season of pay TV,
Great, I'm happy
where you
about
wouldn't
that.
have gotten it before.
Right, but if they can scan me on day one and then use me on day 8, they only have to pay me for 2 days and not for the full 8 days. Is that correct?
No, because the digital replica section has a minimum for payment of use.
Right.
And the standard of that for an employment-based digital replica is the number of days you would have had to work had they not used the digital
So
replica.
I get the intervening days too, if that's what
No,
happens.
not the intervening days, but the number of days that you would have had to do the work. So.
Oh, well, but I would have gotten top of show. I would have gotten 8 days. Now I'm only getting 2 days. Is that what you're saying?
I don't understand why you would have gotten top of show before, but not now.
Because, well, major role performer, top of show, guest star, if it's more than 1 day, you get the full
Yeah, but they could also just engage you on 2-day contracts for that right now, couldn't
No,
they?
they couldn't. They have to engage you for the top. The
They
major
don't
role
have
performer.
to. You
Yeah,
may
no, they do.
negotiate.
They do. On a
if
network
they,
show.
If they engage you as a,
If you're a
if
guest
you're top of
star,
show, but you don't
you
have to
get the major role.
On,
You have to
on
get
a
the
network
guarantee.
show, you absolutely do. It's 100%. I'm positive if one of the staff wants to speak to that.
If you are engaged as a guest star, that's your billing.
On
you
a
have
network
to-
show.
You have to get the major role, which means you are paid on the basis of a 5-day guarantee for a half hour,
Right.
an 8-day guarantee
Right.
for an hour. Nothing about AI
But
or
you could do
anything
a
in this
one-day guest
contract
star on a
changes that.
You could do a one-day guest star on a network show, right? So I'm saying if they do a one-day guest star and then they scan you, and they use you on that other day where they're going to pay you for that day, they're no longer going to pay you for the major role, or they are?
Because you're no longer it's no longer 1 day. So the 1 day exception is only if they get you in 1
So
day.
we are gonna get the full
digital
then.
replica is now triggering a second day of
Okay.
employment for you. So they're not going to be able to access the 1 day exception.
So we would get the major role.
Yeah, you'd get the major role.
Okay, great, and that's fantastic. And do we get the intervening days if they decide to shoot it, to shoot that scene that they're going to put me into a month later?
They shoot the scene. You're going to get the major role guarantee.
Right. What about the intervening days?
The consecutive employment, the intervening days for a month, you wouldn't get that now.
I wouldn't get it now? Why not?
Because you'd get dropped and picked up.
Because there are now more drop pickups than there used to be in the contract, right?
Well, there are now more drop-in pickups, but
Yeah.
there were drop-in pickups before.
Right, but there was
and
one.
if you were going to have
yeah.
a month-long gap,
Yeah.
you were going to
A
get
lot of people were making a lot
nobody's-
of money that way, though.
Okay.
You're not
I
gonna
just
get a
want
month
to
of-
say
you're not
thank
gonna
you
get a
to the
month of-
people that are leaving. We appreciate your attendance, and we will have more opportunities to have a dialogue about this for those that are unable to be heard.
I'll take one more question. Microphone 1, please.
Since we have one question left, we're going to group Myra Lisa and Rodney together. if
Okay.
That's okay with you.
Quick.
Okay.
We have
Hi, I'm Myra Lise, I'll strike captain for Party Mount and Disney. I want to say thank you so much to the negotiating committee. I know how hard you guys have worked on this contract, and the comments that have been coming online about throwing us under the bus, I know is not true. You guys have been working really hard and have our backs. I do have a question for stunts. I am an actor, but I told this person since she couldn't be here that I would ask this question. That the AI protections gives no guardrails for stunts, no protections at all. In fact, it does the opposite, including allowing us to be replaced with scans to double actors if production deems necessary, and officially allow them to make contracts official, which will heavily affect the residuals of many performers who spent weeks or months building the action, but the only credit you'll get from the potential single day it actually took to shoot, unless they use a scan so they can get nothing. Is that true, or what is the actual, are they protected?
So, so first of all, appreciate that, and by the way, appreciate your being a captain. We ran into each other a lot out on the picket lines, so thank you for that. Number one, it's not true that there are no guardrails in AI for stunt performers. We sort of talked about this earlier, but especially in the generative AI section, the provisions that require notice and negotiation over compensation are a huge protection against the use of synthetic fakes in place of stunt performers, because it gives us the ability to make sure that those synthetic fakes actually cost something real, so that the companies do not have an economic incentive to do that. And I think it's really a mistake to underestimate the importance of that provision, because especially with respect to stunt performers, that is one of the primary concerns that they should have that's unique to stunt performers, because of the fact that so much of the work that they do is not attached to a recognizable element, which is why synthetic fakes are such a risk in that particular area and why that provision is so important. As to the remaining parts of the contract, it is true that there may be some stunt jobs that are impacted by principal performers choosing to grant consent to their digital replica being used for something that would otherwise have been done by a stunt performer. So that's a legitimate concern. That's why I said we're gonna, but I would say it's not a concern that stunt performers don't have protections if there's a digital replica created of them. They have the exact same protection as everybody else in that regard, and it certainly is something that we're gonna monitor during the course of the term of this contract to make sure that we do not have a burgeoning problem in the area of stunt performers' job protection.
Just one more statement, sorry.
He's not going to.
Hi, Rodney Van Johnson. This is just an idea. 160 members. The biggest way in order to control AI is to be able to control AI. What we need to do is we need to be able to create our own platform. If we're going to do AI, we need to create our own platform, meaning that you create your own platform that has your own bank of people. We monitor everything. We sell, or we give, or we allow the studios to use our platform, not a third-party platform, but our platform that you all create. It's the exact same thing. So what's going to happen is when they come in and they ask for so-and-so, we already have the data. They don't have to go and get the third data. So the data, we own everything. You create a whole platform, you have your own software. I spoke to this with Jason, and I think it would be a very good idea, because right now you're trying to monitor something you can't control at all. So if you can control it, then you are in control. If I can control all these faces out here, it's 160 people, 160,000 people, that's not a whole lot of people to monitor in a system. So if you create your own platform, you give it to the studios, they have to use your platform. That way you control everything.
Thank you.
Thanks, Redding. It's a great point. It's one that we've been working on and will continue to work on as well.
Yeah. So I just want to let you all know that if it was up to us, we would go through the line and hear every one of these questions. But it's prohibitive for us to do that because the Palladium has to close. We have a lot of people working here. So write your questions down and we'll address them on, no, you're saying no, you don't want to do that? Address them on the webinar.
We're in overtime here.
Okay, because we're in overtime. And
Hey, Duncan, do you want Constantine to say something as the mayor of Burbank?
No.
It's up to you as the chair. I just don't understand how
I can't hear you.
It's fine with me. It's fine with me. I don't have an objection, but.
All right. So, no, I'm sorry. We have to leave. Otherwise, we'll be in overtime, triple overtime. Okay? It becomes prohibitive for us. I just want to thank you, especially all the captains here, everyone who has supported the negotiating team, because we could not have done that without your support, really.
And Jody, can I just remind everybody, if you didn't get a chance to ask your question, you can send your question to tvtheatrical2023@sagaftra.org. We'll respond to it in writing by email. We will have another webinar for everybody on Saturday, so you can come to that and ask your questions as well. There's all the information on the website at sagaftra.org/contracts2023, and we look forward to seeing you at an upcoming chance to continue this conversation. Thank you.